Commodore hits the skids. Sega bets big on entertainment centers. And the emulation revolution is born. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Happy to be here, Carl.
And you're not contractually obligated to say that.
That's true. I have no contract nor a salary.
And you never will. Did I say that out loud? Okay. Okay.
My only hope is that Carl will one day carry out his promise to delete the pictures so that this can be over.
Oh, yeah, you keep thinking that. So, everybody, before we can turn on the time machine and head back 30 years to January of 1994, it's time for obligatory podcast banter. So, Alex, what have you been up to?
Oh, just keeping on. Of course, my podcast is still going strong, and I'm very, very proud of this month's. I mean, I always think we put out a good product, but we're covering the Sega Saturn right now, and it's never been covered well, and that includes by us, by which I mean they create worlds, not Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, because I definitely, when we first covered this a few years back, made a couple of faux pas just because the Japanese sources were only starting to become available. But there are so many Japanese sources that have come to light now, largely through the work of John Harrison at Mega Drive Shock. Have to give full credit where credit is due there, that we have a much better picture of just what the hell led to that giant cluster. And so I think we've got, it's only part one that's out at the time of this recording, but it'll be followed by a part two. And I think taken together, they give a far better picture of just why Sega did what they did. And you can kind of understand it even as you are watching the train wreck play out in slow motion in hindsight.
On the day we're recording this is also the day that episode dropped. I'm not quite through it yet, but yes, the Sega Saturn has always been a fascination for me. I will admit that I very seldomly question anything you do on They Create Worlds, because as I've said on this podcast before, if you're not listening to They Create Worlds and you're only listening to this podcast, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Alex does a great job over there. And it's one of my favorites, to the point where my wife actually has said that I have a man crush because I will be doing stuff in the kitchen and just have it running in the background. But that's another issue entirely. But the issue here is that was the one thing I never quite agreed with you on, even back in the day, because it's about that second processor, and I've looked at that motherboard. Yeah. I'm not a hugely technical guy, but that thing makes no goddamn sense. But you're doing a great job over there. I love the fact that you've got those new sources, and it's going to tie into a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, ties into a lot of the stuff we've talked about over the last couple months. But this race to the next gen that we're seeing in the 1994 jumps, and already we saw in the last few 1993 jumps, you're encapsulating the Sega side of that story beautifully. So everybody go check that out. Also, remember, we already had our first version of this, the the hangout for the patrons, our live stream at the end of the month. So if you're a patron, you'll get the access to that. It's going to be jointly between our my podcast here and your podcast, and we're going to be putting up a poll here pretty soon on the patron page so that everybody can pick some games for us to play during the live stream.
Absolutely. And if you happen to be a patron of both podcasts, we're going to do a poll on each, and there's no obligation to be a patron of both podcasts to participate. But what we're going to do is we're going to have some of the rejects from 7 Minutes in Heaven, and we'll give one podcast the opportunity to vote on the 80s, the other podcast the opportunity to vote on the 90s, and then we'll switch that up every month.
Exactly.
To give everybody a chance to participate. Really excited. We have a lot of great ideas. So we kind of soft launched it last month, which is a kind way of saying we looked at the calendar and realized February is much shorter than we think, and it's time to do this thing even though we haven't prepared. So we soft launched it. But still had a pretty good turnout despite that. Thank you so much for those that came. And we're going to have things a little more planned out, a little more structured, and a little more advertised in advance for March.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's something that's still being developed, but we wanted to give something back to the patrons. And I really think that in addition to all the other wonderful benefits, if you're a patron of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, you get early access to the interviews. We've got 3 up right now, all with European games journalists. We've got Jazz Rignall, who was one of the founders of Zap64 and a couple of other big magazines in the UK before becoming one of the founders of IGN. And
let me tell you, you are missing out. You are missing out if you are not listening to Carl's interview with Jazz.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
There's some good stuff in there.
The guy has seen every aspect of the business, and also just the differences in the economic models on different continents and stuff. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, and Carl's just so good. I got to toot your horn here.
Oh, thanks.
Carl's just so good at drawing this stuff out. It's that legal training, and I don't say that sarcastically. I really mean that. This is a man who has sat in a deposition, and you can tell because I do think your interviews are often set apart. Because Jazz has been interviewed before. I mean, he's a popular interview, but you're just so good at drawing out answers in places where a lot of your subjects haven't gone before. And so that's why, your interviews are such a treat, whether you're interviewing someone really obscure, which you do sometimes, or you're interviewing someone that's been interviewed 50 times before, because you usually find a new angle in there somewhere.
Oh, I'm currently interviewing somebody. We got our second session this next week that has never been interviewed for anything at all before. But he was key to things like the BBC Micro hitting the shelves and a bunch of other machines. And his insight into international distribution chains is phenomenal. We've been having a great time talking. So that interview is coming a few months down the pipeline. I got a few more out there, and my 2-part interview with Michael Hengst, former German journalist turned game strategy guide publisher turned freelance game producer, and now back to writing about games for the German version of Retro Gamer and others. Talks about life in the business. Very, very, one of the nicest guys in the world. Oh my God. Occasionally he's here in town. He lives in Austria nowadays. He's already promised me we're going to go out for a beer the next time he's here. I am so looking forward to that.
Love it.
But yeah, so, lots of good stuff. I got another 3 or 4 interviews already recorded. I just have to find time to edit them. So if you want early access to those, check it out. And if you want to see the video version, of our next segment, our Let's Play version of it, it's not the content here that we talk on the audio podcast. It's totally different. If you want to check that out, you got to be a patron. Come on over. And that is our segment, The 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-host must play a game that they've never played before that was reviewed in a publication dated January of 1994. And boy, did we have some amazing titles. I mean, some real stone cold classics on here. We had Dungeons and Dragons Tower of Doom. Probably in my top 5 arcade games of all time.
I've played that one though, so we couldn't do that one. Okay. I've played it, and I love that and Shadows over Mistar as well.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
Actually, that's something we might be able to do then for the patron, because I've got the Steam version that has great online multiplayer.
There you go, but only if the people vote for it.
There you go. We got the Settlers on the Amiga, Cannon Fodder. Dracula X on the PC Engine CD-ROM. We had, there was also Suburban Commando for the Amiga. We had Mortal Kombat for the Amiga, which would have been a nice counterpoint to Street Fighter 2 on the C64. Just saying. But you went with, a game whose notoriety or lack thereof lives in infamy. Cliffhanger for the SNES.
That's right. Hide your Jeeps, because we gonna be falling.
Okay, and that's a reference that goes back to last month's ad of the month. So everybody, not everybody. Alex, are you ready to hang on some cliffs?
I cannot wait to see the undoubtedly crisp gameplay and wide variety of enemies that await me in this classic game.
Let's have at it.
Talk to your aunts.
So?
I hear your grades stink.
You don't look healthy. Eat a roll. Eat a roll. Eat a roll.
Cliffhanger from Sony Image Show. Sure, it's just a game.
Welcome back, Alex. So, based on your 7 minutes with the game, how would you describe Cliffhanger on the Super NES?
I would describe Cliffhanger on the Super NES as a side-scrolling beat-em-up in which you are in a Sisyphean struggle with Knife Guy and Green Camo Guy.
And what makes it Sisyphean?
Because they're mostly the only two guys you see, and there are only two of them on the screen, and you beat them both, and then you walk a couple of steps, and then it's the same two guys on the screen. Wash, rinse, repeat, and then a red guy shows up eventually who is literally just a palette swap.
Okay, so That sounds extremely innovative and forward-thinking.
Well,
and
yeah. So, but in all seriousness, it's interesting because I haven't really played any Sony ImageSoft games because I was smart enough to stay away from them when I was that age. But the reputation they've always had is very pretty and very dumb, and this holds up to that because the sad thing is the graphics are actually very pretty. There are good use of colors. There's good use of parallax scrolling. The animations, while the game is very slow. I mean, the pace of gameplay is not good at all. The animations are smooth and have enough frames to look very good. But then you're just fighting the same two guys over and over and over again, and input lag is a problem, and slowness of movement is a problem, and there's just no there.
Yeah, it seems like something that should have been dead by the time Final Fight came out, and it just looks so dull and resource empty.
Yeah.
It's got to be an extremely small cart size. I can't imagine that they were willing to spend very much on the cart. on the cartridge.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it's normally portrayed, and I mean, I don't know that the people that were at Sony at the time felt this way themselves, but the way the rest of the world kind of portrays it is that Sony was like, we're Sony, or more accurately, we're Columbia Pictures. We know how to make entertainment products, so we will just do the video game and it'll be great. And spoiler alert, it's a slight bit different.
Yeah, people kind of expect something, I think. And it's weird because this game actually gets two fundamentally different designs. And I misspoke earlier that there was no Amiga version. There was an Amiga version of the license, but this game design only comes out for the Super NES, the Genesis, and the Sega CD. And weirdly enough, the Sega CD version has an extra level with sort of a 3D effect, which I don't know why. It's where you're snowboarding down the hill. And obviously also the intro is, clips from the movie and stuff because it's a Sega CD. But the rest of the game is identical to the Super NES version, but why the 3D snowboarding scene is not on the SNES makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, well, it may just have been beyond the team to get there, though. As we were talking about in some off-camera banter, there was a raft going down the hill level in the Indiana Jones trilogy on the Super Nintendo, so we certainly know it would have been possible.
Oh, definitely. I mean, come on, the Super NES would have been able to do that without breaking a sweat.
Oh, yeah, with all the Mode 7 stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's... Now, the programmer of this of the Super NES version, and want to make sure I get the name right. Sorry, I was looking at the programmer of the Genesis version. So the programmer of the Genesis version has a bit of a history with games that have disappointed me in the past. This guy actually. Yeah, not a little bit better. This is the Malibu Interactive. They're not really what you'd call a AAA game development studio. And it really feels like they were just thrown this license to, get her done. And at least it's not the unmitigated disaster of the Amiga version, which is an even worse design, if that's possible. But, yeah. So, I guess, all being said and done, would you recommend anybody play this game nowadays?
No, I think you should just get right back in your Jeep and drive away.
And I will have to put a link to that ad so people get that joke. Okay, with that being said... before we can turn on the time machine, there's one more stop we need to make, and that is to check in with our good friend Ethan for a little segment we call the Department of Correction.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, before we can find out everything that I got wrong in our December of 1993 episode, I guess you have something to say to our good friend Alex?
I might. Though we are going to defer the longer comment because let's not have a debate right here on air at this very moment. For Alex alluded to my opinions on Mass Effect, but we're gonna defer that to a future Department of Corrections.
Or maybe we can do it during the Patreon live stream. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Look at Carl trying to monetize our animosity towards each other. Look at he is a true businessman.
I mean, you've just defined late stage capitalism right there.
True. Carl, you're a genius. But, Alex, one thing for you. For the Alex comment of December 1993, you commented on how Sonic had a higher Q score than Mario, and you're saying Mario wasn't doing much in 1993. There was one thing that Mario was doing in 1993.
Mario Kart?
Cocaine?
Not that.
Right? Meth is too early. Oh, heroin was getting really big, the whole grunge scene.
Carl doing the word twisting again. This happened last Department of Corrections, too.
I mean, he's a lawyer being put on trial for his life. What do you think he's going to do but dissemble?
Yes, but there may or may not have been a something that happened for Mario in 1993, though Alex
movie,
may not.
The Mario movie.
There it is. There it is.
Oh, yeah.
You're right. The Mario movie.
And that is probably the reason why he went down in 1993.
Right. Because everyone pretended not to know him.
Yes.
There's probably some truth to that would have lent some credence to the not cool look.
True.
Bob Hoskins was a fantastic Mario.
Yeah, I mean, he did very well.
That movie has 5 bajillion problems. It's just Bob Hoskins ain't one of them.
Bob Hoskins, brilliant actor. Rest in peace. But let us finish up for the threes. December 1993 will be the end of yet another year. Carl, come forth. We are assigning you a brand new number, and you will take it with you wherever you go.
I feel so grown up.
There it is. You are, it's year 5, right? Year 5 of the podcast?
Year 5 of the podcast. We're halfway through, baby. Halfway.
All right. Don't look at the dates that these are being released on. But anyways, for December 1993, let's first start off with the thing about the N64. Of the public arguments that they made against using the CD. And I cover this in my article about the N64. I did talk to some people who were on the Project Reality team. CD was considered. It was an active conversation that they actually had. But I will say that in public, Yamauchi did indeed use the load time thing as an argument against CD.
They did. And they were legitimately concerned about the load time thing, but the thing that was really on their minds, according to former senior vice president and chairman of Nintendo of America, Howard Lincoln, who I have talked to, was definitely the piracy. They were also concerned about load times, but
yes, I'm not saying that the I'm just saying publicly that was.
Well, yeah, you don't say the quiet part out loud, if you're doing your job right.
True. And we know that, at least for a while, Yamauchi was doing his job pretty well.
That's true.
Next up, another technical thing on the N64. Standard N64 games were 32 megabytes.
Megabytes,
I believe he said
megabits?
16. Megabytes.
Okay.
I hate the bits. The bits comparison. But it is definitely 32 megabytes.
Okay. Do we know what the range was? What the biggest cart that they ever released was?
I know that they did 64 megabyte carts, which is very easy to remember. I don't think it went that high. I don't know if there were 128 megabyte carts. But because I believe Conquer, they use like super duper compression, and they got that in 64 megabytes.
Yeah.
I wonder if kids today that are more used to gigabytes and terabytes are as annoyed about mentions of megabytes as you are about megabits. Which I also hate megabits. I'm not just putting that on you. I hate that.
Yes, it was a marketing term at the time to make the number larger.
Exactly.
So, then you went on a discussion about how games can't tell stories, Carl. And I just have to say that story and nonlinearity are not mutually exclusive, and this extends to the publishing world. There are books that can be nonlinear, not just, game books and choose your own adventures and whatnot. And I don't think that most people who study stories academically say that nonlinearity is anti-story.
Kurt Vonnegut sure knew how to be nonlinear.
Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, when I talk about nonlinearity, I mean I'm talking about. It's not about linearity. I guess linearity is one thing, but I probably misspoke, and I really meant of branching stories in the sense of the choices that you make influencing story. So and
you're saying that's not story?
No, what I'm saying is that it's very, very difficult to make a story that actually gives you branching options and still have a compelling narrative, because either you're going to have to limit the options so dramatically in order to keep the narrative interesting that it doesn't really feel like you have a choice, or you're going to have to put people on a certain level of rails even if you don't tell the story in a chronological order, but you're still going to have to put them on rails in order to keep the drama moments where you want them to be.
Or you just make Baldur's Gate 3.
I knew you were going to go there.
Which actually has a lot of linear story beats in it, despite all the freedom in it.
Yes, I'm actually almost done with that game. By the next Department of Corrections, I'll be finished.
And I am still at least 2 generations of hardware away from being able to even boot it. So, unfortunately, I can't speak to Baldur's Gate 3 just to my previous experiences with such things.
Man, my 12-year-old PZ can boot Baldur's Gate 3. Come on now.
You're talking to somebody whose last computer was a mid-range machine from 10 years ago that was already 3 years old at that point. So yeah, I'm not booting
okay.
soon, sadly.
Okay.
But anyways,
you have a kid you can sell that they go for a pretty good price.
But anyways, I would say, obviously I'm someone who plays a lot of story-based games, but I don't think that limitation is nearly as big as it seems. And this is a larger debate we could get into, but we're not going to. We are skipping to the next Department of Corrections thing, talking about Ahead Inc.'s guitar peripheral. Now, I do not believe that there is any specific, people crossing over from Ahead Inc. to Harmonix. And in the case of Harmonix, when they went to Guitar Hero, it's because they had a relationship with Konami, and they were doing a port, or I can't remember. Guitar Freaks factors in.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't realize this, but Guitar Hero was not Harmonix's idea. It was Red Octane's idea. And they brought it to Harmonix.
But I will say that Harmonix was at least aware of Ahead Inc. legally speaking. Their patents do indeed show a reference to the Ahead Inc. Guitars. And later Namco purchased those patents.
Now, did they purchase the Ahead or Harmonix patents?
Ahead Inc. Their patents.
Do you know if they ever did anything with those?
As far as I know, no. But then again, I don't know all of the little fiddly things they've done in the 2000s in Japan. So for all I know, they have a guitar thing, and I just don't know about it.
Very likely.
There's a lot of stuff in the modern Japanese arcades, y'all.
Mm.
And finally, the burning question that everybody was thinking about from the last episode. Pedro Pascal was 18 in December 1993.
Very good.
There we go.
So that's the Department of Corrections for December 1993. Carl, you're grown up now, and you've got a brand new spanking time machine. Where are you going to go?
I think it's time to go to January of 1994.
$4 billion a year breaking computer graphics.
Information superhighway.
Welcome to January of 1994. Now remember, everybody, and I didn't do this at the top, when we're talking about January 1994, we're talking about news items that appeared in publications dated January 1994. So some of them may have happened earlier. It's a framing device. And also remember, if you do have any comments or anything, send them our way. Email address and everything else on the socials is in the show notes. Alex, what's our first story?
Well, Carl, it appears that Sega goes all in on big arcades.
In the wake of the opening of the Sega Games Room in the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, Sega has announced a deal with French amusement center chain SDVI, fronted by Formula One legend Alain Prost, I think I've got that right, to open a series of Sega-branded amusement centers in France, the first to be on the Champs-Élysées. The 1,000 square meter facility will be named Sega Megapolis. Sega plans on opening 500 amusement centers all over Europe. Sega also wants to open 40 large facilities in the countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, with the first being a 2,500 square meter facility in Malaysia and additional ones in Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. 15 of them still in 1994.
Yeah, so I know on my podcast I've really been banging the drum in all my Sega episodes about how Nakayama wanted to be the next Disney, and I know that in previous jumps when we've had similar stories, we beat that drum here as well, but this really says it more than anything else. It's like, yeah, Nakayama just went crazy on the opening of the high-end fancy schmancy arcades all over the world.
Yeah, this is really, I mean, just, it's an insane amount of things. It's going to lead to things like the giant Sega thing at the Trocadero in London. And it's, I mean, I don't really think it's sustainable. The economics of it don't make any sense.
No, because, not only is it a lot of space, but, the Trocadero, the Champs-Élysées, I mean, rents ain't cheap. And we're talking a lot of square meters in some high rent environments.
Exactly. And I mean, in the States, you've got a bit of a recession going on at this point. Japan is going through this. This is, I mean, it's one thing to throw in a couple of quarters here and there to play a game of Virtua Fighter. It's another one to be dropping, $4 or $5 for a 3-minute go on a VR setup or some super awesome hydraulic simulator. You're going to go in, drop that, and then leave again.
Yeah, and I mean, on the other side of it, you can see why Nakayama is kind of so high on this concept, because amusement parks are very popular in Japan. Like, everybody likes amusement parks, but the Japanese really like amusement parks. And of course, land is very expensive there because it's an island, and there was a real estate bubble that may have recently burst. And so you can see how a Japanese executive like that would be like, everyone loves amusement parks, but amusement parks are really expensive and take up so much space. Video game amusement parks are the answer, but unfortunately nobody was asking the question.
Well, it's not only that. You also have to remember, this comes from my years of experience of living in Florida. When you go to an amusement park, it's a destination. You park your car in this massive parking lot. You're not leaving that place. They're going to overcharge you for the food. They're going to overcharge you for all of this. If you're on the Champs-Élysées, I've been on the Champs-Élysées. If I go into a place, if I want something to eat, I'm going to leave that place and go someplace else to eat. So
absolutely,
where you're making that extra money through the captive audience of the amusement park just evaporates. Yes. And this is a weird thing because, I mean, in the Luxor Hotel, it makes sense because you're making money off the gambling. But Sega Enterprises Incorporated in the U.S., and and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the coin-op division of Sega in the States, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This is not Sega America. This is Sega Enterprises USA, which is the arcade, the coin-op arm.
Gotcha. Now, they've just appointed a Ned DeWitt, and he's a former CEO of Six Flags, the amusement park chain in the States. And he's now the president of the entertainment. He was also the president of the entertainment group of Madison Square Garden. So big events and amusement parks. And now he's going to be president and CEO of Sega Enterprises. They're bringing this guy in who knows about amusement parks. And I don't know how long he's there, but it feels like this is leading up to GameWorks. That this is going to be his solution in the States.
Well, no. GameWorks is an entirely separate initiative, and I've had the privilege of interviewing Skip Paul, who was, as the number 3 guy at Universal, was one of the people that was behind GameWorks, and basically that came about because he and his buddy, and they really are buddies, Steven Spielberg, were like, wouldn't it be great if there was just this big place where you could drink and play games? So that's in all seriousness, that's actually coming from a completely different place than from this Japanese push or from anything that Ned DeWitt may be a part of. That was Skip Paul and Steven Spielberg really driving that. And then working with, I think Al Stone at Sega to get her done.
Gotcha. Okay, then that makes more sense. I wasn't sure what the timeline was. I was like, they'll solve itself in future episodes. But now we've solved the problem.
Yeah, now I'm sure that because Nakayama and Sega is so interested in doing these big venues that made them very receptive to the idea of doing GameWorks. But, it was really driven by Paul and Spielberg really thinking that would be cool. Because they're both game fiend. I mean, everyone knows Spielberg's a game fiend, but Skip Paul is also, he was quite the arcade rat. He always had machines in his office when he was legal counsel at Atari.
Interesting. Okay. That actually sounds like a gent I need to interview then. Sorry, legal counsel. I have yet to do a legal counsel of any of the big companies. So, okay. Let's move on. We've got so much more in this coin-op field.
We do indeed. And really everyone is kind of a high on this new phase of the coin-op business for whatever reason, as Blockbuster gets in on the FES biz. Sorry, is it supposed to be FES or is it FEC?
FES, Family Entertainment. Oh, FEC.
That's what I thought.
Family Entertainment Center. You're right.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. What can I say? Sometimes I get typos in these.
It's okay. It's okay.
I clarify it in the next one. So, video rental chain Blockbuster has decided to expand into the arcade amusement park business with its Blockbuster Entertainment Center division. Headed by former Disney World Magic Kingdom director Bill Burns as president. The plans call for, quote, neighborhood Disneylands, end quote, across the USA with games, rides, and VR. Project development has been completed according to the company, and site selection is underway to determine how many sites they wish to open.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really weird period in what you might call the coin-op business because, street locations were getting out as fast as they could. We've talked about 7-Eleven. Traditional arcades are on the decline, but at the same time, there has really been a boom in these family entertainment center kind of places, which are not just coin-op venues, but they'll combine coin-operated games with mini golf or go-karts, batting cages, bumper cars, or even for the younger kids, things like Discovery Zone are coming along where they have this giant series of tubes that they can crawl through and then emerge and play a few games. I think this accounts for part of the disconnect where all of these companies that aren't traditionally in coin-op are suddenly excited about getting into something coin-op adjacent. But it's really not. It's like the coin-op side of it and the video game side of it and the pinball side of it are really almost incidental. People are just looking for new experiences. They're not really looking for new interactive entertainments. And so I think that's why all these companies that get in, whether it's a Sega that decides that these big installations of the future, or even if it's an Electronic Arts or an Acclaim, who are like, we need to have a coin-op division so we can create our own in-house coin-op hits. I think that's why they end up kind of falling on their face pretty quickly, because people are really going for the laser tag and the go-karts, and they're just playing a few games on the side, and it's not really going to be this bold new business for coin-op and video games so much as it will be for laser tag and go-karts.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's also this thing that we've been talking about how the video game experience in the home and what you get in the arcades is not as... the difference isn't as big as it was 10 years earlier. I mean, absolutely. It's no longer, at home I'm playing something, with like 10 colors on screen, and I go in the arcade and it's all these wonderful shades and, a million things moving around. The games at home and the games in the arcade are not that different, of course, with the burgeoning 3D, but the experience isn't that different yet. And the equipment that you need to invest in for VR and things like that is just so astronomical. And the gameplay isn't there to justify this kind of investment. But yeah, it really seems like this whole neighborhood Disneyland, I guess there seems to be this feeling that people want, or somebody got it in a bee in their bonnet that everybody wants to go to an amusement park. And yeah, I guess it just doesn't make any sense. It's weird.
Well,
maybe they just saw the number of divorces happening and they were like, dads are going to need something to do with their kids on the weekends.
That is not outside the realm of possibility, Carl, I must say. But speaking of that highly expensive VR equipment that you were previously alluding to, VR meet Redemption. Redemption meet VR.
Alternate World Technologies, makers of the location-based VR version of Wolfenstein, have announced a new version of their system that will allow players to earn points for redemption through play. The model will not have standard tickets, but use a magnetic tape card to record the points earned. So, how many whistle rings do I get for killing an SS officer again?
Carl always with the hard-hitting questions here in the newsroom.
Yes. What can I say? Journalism. Now, I couldn't find any proof that this actually makes it off the assembly line or gets installed anywhere, but it is an interesting idea.
I guess it's just that, the thing about redemption is you have to feel like you're getting a lot for almost nothing. And of course you're really not, because, you're 5 fistfuls of tickets buys you like a 50-cent plastic figure or something. But, when it's a redemption game, or even when it's a video game that has tickets attached, if you're playing a video game anyway and it spits out 50 tickets, you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Because you feel like you're almost getting something for nothing because you're not paying attention to the quarters you're putting in. With VR, you are paying attention to the money you are putting into that machine, because VR time is outrageously expensive, and I just don't see how this would really create a value add incentive, because this only works when it feels like I said, you're getting something for almost nothing.
Yeah, I think the idea of using the magnetic cards was probably more an incentive to keep coming back to the machine.
Yes.
Similar to what Sega would do with Ghost Recon, for example. Or Ghost Squad, where you'd want to keep coming back to the machine again and again and again because you have this card. And also, I don't know if the card reader would be cheaper than the mechanical machine to dispense tickets. Maybe.
That's a good question. I don't know at the time, just because the magnetic card system's much newer technology and the others very mature technology. I mean, certainly today it would absolutely be cheaper, which is why that's what they all do today. But I do wonder what the economics on that would look like at this moment in time, just because the technology is a little less mature.
That's true. And the other thing is also, I mean, the only real app these guys have is Wolfenstein at this point. I mean, you couldn't just... maybe you just don't want to hand out the same tickets that are going to kids, who are shooting water at a clown's teeth. You don't want them standing there with the guy who's just killed, 50 people in Wolfenstein.
They're Nazis. It's okay, Carl.
I'm saying there's also dogs. Those poor German shepherds. Let's think of the German shepherds, people.
Very true. But it is not just video game technology and coin-op technology that is on the growth in location-based entertainment as the karaoke wars heat up in Japan.
The karaoke market in Japan isn't just exploding in size, with the number of karaoke rooms doubling in the last 3 years to 115,000, but a technology arms race is also brewing, with former leader Pioneer, that had an early lead with its Laserdisc-based system, being dethroned by JVC, which introduced a CD-based system that could store 360 discs at a time with an average of 17 songs each. Pioneer wasn't going to take this lying down, introducing its own CD system that had the same video quality as its Laserdisc system, but could only handle 14 songs per disc. Sony and Matsushita are also in the business now with CD-based systems, but they may all be out of luck, with video game company Taito entering the fray, as well as Brother Industries and Ricoh Company, all offering machines that store songs on a remote server and deliver the songs to the rooms via telephone lines. Yamaha Corporation is also going to be entering the networked machine market in the spring. The network systems eliminate the delay between a song becoming popular and discs being pressed and distributed to the karaoke parlors.
National pastime of Japan.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because in this article, this is coming from the Japan Economic News, an English language paper. They say the real boom has just been in the last 2 to 3 years, where it really just exploded on the scene. They also make a brief comment about how the recession in Japan is sort of promoting this relatively cheap, localized entertainment.
Yes.
But yeah, the fact that these guys are building up an infrastructure for telecommunication, distribution of digital content, that technology is definitely going to help these companies get in touch with how to do this kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. And it's no accident that all of the big Japanese coin-op companies, some of them like Taito that started out in the jukebox business way back in the day, would be very interested in getting involved in this, because even though they are rarely the dominant players in the field, there are just so many areas of their other core businesses that they're able to improve by keeping up to date with all this infrastructure stuff and all of these electronics and new disc media, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. And especially once you get away from having to manufacture physical moving parts and go solid state, if you will, suddenly they've got the advantage because they're used to producing, in these small quantities. A company like Pioneer that's in the commercial end user type of production, they're used to, okay, we're going to make 100 million of something or 50 million or whatever. Taito's used to production run of our game is 12,000. We know how to deal with that and make money off of that.
That's very true. And finally, we end this look at CoinOp with a little bit of actual video game news as NBA Jam beats records.
After just 10 months on the market, Midway's NBA Jam has become the highest earning arcade game in the history of the industry, earning as much as $2,400 a week, beating out classics such as Ms. Pac-Man.
Yeah, so NBA Jam is just the most brilliant model for the arcade that has practically ever been done, because you can't, they get you with the normal 25 or 50% or 50 cent play to get started. But then if you actually want to play a complete game, you have to keep putting quarters in to finish the game. And so it's a 4-player setup, 2-on-2. And it is always enticing you to put in just a few more quarters to finish that game. And it is just super effective.
Yeah. And it has a couple of extra advantages. Number one, it's got the recognizable players. With those, bobblehead type figures with well-defined recognizable faces. It's got the NBA logo on it, which helps the legitimacy. I mean, we get previews this month of Run and Gun, which is sort of the sprite scaling competitor, I believe, from, is that Konami? Run and Gun? It's a dual monitor setup. I think it's Konami, because it's the first basketball game they've done in a while.
Yeah, it's theirs. I thought it was. Yeah.
Those are just, it's generic basketball.
Yeah.
And NBA Jam, they talk about it in this Playmeter article that, Ken Griffey Jr. has one of these in his home. There's other celebrities that have this machine in their home. It's just an addiction for these guys.
Exactly. And, this is kind of broader than just NBA Jam, but for the most part, there are a couple of exceptions. The Japanese, in the NES, of course, the Japanese companies dominated the sport genres because they dominated all the genres. But the Japanese just tended to put, 3 or 4 people on these games, sometimes whom didn't always know the rules, whereas these kind of sports games were a labor of love for whether it was, EA doing Madden or the Williams folks doing NBA Jam. And so, yeah, they're bringing sports to a whole new level, just with that level of care and detail, even in the game like this that is not in any way meant to be realistic, but it still captures the essence of something that is very true to basketball.
Very true. And unlike fighting games like Street Fighter and stuff, you can't just make another one that's going to have the same appeal because it's not going to have the license.
Exactly. So now turning our attention to a few financial numbers, the Japanese recession hitting video game makers.
Yes, Japan's Game Machine magazine reported that a recent spate of financial reports showed that with the exceptions of Sega, SNK, Capcom, and Konami, every company in the industry saw themselves, quote, squeezed. Namco's gross was down 1%, Taito's 6%, and I keep getting this one wrong. Jaleco?
I believe it's Jaleco.
Jaleco's was down 15%, and Tecmo's was down 39% year over year.
And let me tell you, Sega, Capcom, and Konami are not going to be far behind. They're just able to pull the wool over a little longer because they have a particularly robust foreign sales. in the U.S. and in Europe, which allow them to skate by just a little longer, though the strong yen that is going on in this period and the kind of beginning of the disinterest of the market in the 16-bit home games is going to pretty soon be flattening them as well. Yeah, it's just, this period is kind of bad news all around for the Japanese companies. And wouldn't you know, I mean, in the latter half of the 90s, a bunch of the smaller ones go out. And in the beginning of the 2000s, a bunch of the mid-tier ones left, merge with each other. And, this is kind of the beginning of that process. And of course, the bursting of the bubble economy is the first Titanic shot. But we got a few more coming.
Oh, yeah. We will be covering them in detail.
But for now, as we said, Capcom isn't so affected yet. And in fact, Street Fighter II Turbo ships 1 million units.
The SNES port of Street Fighter II Turbo has shipped 1 million units in just the first month, according to Capcom, 4 months ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I mean, Capcom gets a lot of flack for incremental Street Fighter updates, and rightly so. But this one, once you have played Street Fighter II Turbo in the arcade or on a home system, you are incapable, if you are a normal human being, of ever playing Street Fighter II again, because it is so slow. So it's no surprise to me that this leapt right out of the gate. This was actually the first one that I owned. Because this was about the time I got my Super Nintendo. I would have bought Street Fighter II at the time, but it's there was no question about going back and getting, the original Street Fighter II at this point, even if you could find it at a discount or in a bargain bin somewhere. It's no. Turbo is a whole new fighting game.
Yeah, and I can't say that I was a Turbo fan. I was still on the Amiga at this point, and when I did play Street Fighter in an arcade, I was playing it at Sunset Bowl in Ballard, Washington, in Ballard, part of Seattle, and they had an OG Street Fighter 2, and I would play that almost every weekend. So yeah, I never got the Turbo thing, so never worked for me.
Well, I'm sure regular Street Fighter 2 in the arcade felt like Turbo after growing up on the Amiga version.
Oh, hell yes.
So it does sometimes all depend on where you're coming from.
It's all relative.
It is all
At least
relative.
I didn't have to play the C64 version.
There you go. And another company doing well, Acclaim numbers skyrocket.
Acclaim saw their fiscal year ending August 31st income jump 52% year over year to $327 million. This was before Mortal Kombat numbers came in, and they are looking at an even bigger jump with NBA Jam coming in February to home consoles.
So, Acclaim's got that Williams license. Williams has all those arcade hits. The future looks bright indeed, doesn't it, Carl?
As those who have heard my wonderful interview with Mr. Fischbach know, that contract is soon to come to an end because Midway is looking at all that money just go past them by because they didn't think the home market was that important.
Truly, in both directions here, pride goeth before the fall.
Yes. It's Acclaim is riding high. They're still going to get Mortal Kombat 2. I think they get 1 or 2 iterations of NBA Jam out of it. But by Mortal Kombat 3, Midway is going to be doing those ports themselves.
Absolutely. And speaking of ports, we will now turn our attention to console news as Microsoft signs deal with Sega.
Sega has announced that Microsoft will be providing portions of the basic operating system software for Sega's upcoming Saturn console. The extent of the machine's reliance on Microsoft code is not known yet, and no further details could be provided by either Sega nor Microsoft.
Yeah, I don't really know much of anything about this. I mean, obviously, their deal for the Dreamcast for CE is is a much more famous deal.
No. CE is on Saturn. CE is on the Saturn. Sega Rally for the Sega Saturn is actually programmed under CE. That was sort of the demo to show that off.
I mean, Windows CE is on the Dreamcast. That doesn't mean it can't also somehow be on the... But that's definitely on the Dreamcast. Yeah.
Did I get that wrong? I am totally wrong on that. I take it all back. But I thought Sega Rally...
Now, CE was released in 1996, so it's still very possible that there was CE stuff done on the Saturn as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's far more famous for being on the Dreamcast is the only point I was making.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I didn't even know it was still on the Dreamcast. I thought they had dropped it after the whole Saturn fiasco.
Oh no.
They
Sega? Stop with just one fiasco, Carl? Does that sound like the Sega we know and love?
Yeah, you are right. They believed in giving bad managers second chances. So,
But no, it is interesting that they wanted to, have some kind of partnership with Microsoft. I think Okawa was very interested, especially in having those kind of deals, because he was very interested in pushing AI research and networking stuff and whatnot far beyond video games. And this is just speculation on my part, but I do think, because they did a computer together with IBM, and they signed this deal with Microsoft, and my guess is Okawa was less concerned about the impact that this could have on video games specifically, and more concerned with striking really good relationships with these big tech giants that could help him with some of his larger goals. Obviously, he's not running the day-to-day at Sega at this point as the chairman, but CSK's needs are always something that's considered in the Sega business as well, since Sega is a subsidiary.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
But that is mostly speculation on my part. I don't have a lot of good insight on this deal.
Gotcha.
From sources.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's not something that they're hanging high on the flagpole. Now, this news article is coming from the New York Times. The interesting thing here is that the quotes, or the lack of quotes being given, are both coming from Japanese sources. So it's not Sega of America making this announcement, and it's not Sega of America telling them, it's Sega of Japan making the announcement, which goes with what you've been talking about on your show, and what we already know is that all this is being developed in Japan.
Right.
Which, considering that Sega's main market is the United States, probably not the best idea, but okay, that's another issue.
Yep. But while I don't have a lot of insight or a lot to say on that deal, I can sure say a lot about the next one as Namco signs on to PlayStation.
Namco has announced that it will be developing games and technology for Sony's upcoming CD-ROM-based console, while also using the tech for future arcade games. Sony said that they were partnering with Namco due to their strong reputation in the realm of 3D games.
I mean, this was the deal that was critical to the PlayStation, because Sony, being a completely untested entity in this business, trying to do something really revolutionary with this new console, nobody had faith in them. They were all happy to take their meetings. They were all happy to see their demos. But as the book Revolutionaries with Sony indicates, basically everyone they came to said, this is very interesting. Come back to us when you've sold 1 million, which was the size of install base that these third-party publishers needed to guarantee that they'd be able to turn some profit with games. Nobody was willing to go out on a limb and take a chance on them when Sega and Nintendo were already out there. And, I mean, Sony's making Cliffhanger on the Super Nintendo, so clearly they're not coming up with the next Mario or Sonic on their own. So they desperately needed a third party to get on with them, and really Namco was really the only one that would probably ever take this kind of risk right up front, because they are Sega's chief rival in coin-op, and that is a fierce rivalry. So they put their games on Sega consoles, but if they have an alternative to Sega, that would be great. And Nakamura at this point loathes Nintendo, because the first 5 or 6 or so publishers that signed on for the family computer back in the 83, 84 time period got really great deals. And then when those deals expired in 1989, they made these favored nations sign regular deals. And Nakamura, who was very proud and who ruled the roost in coin-op alongside Sega, felt that he was a bigger deal than that. And he said, well, then fine, we'll just go over here and release our games on these systems with blackjack and hookers. And, of course, Nintendo was so big that didn't do anything for their sales, so Nakamura had to come crawling back. And he has not forgotten this. So Namco was the one publisher that was big enough and diversified enough that they wouldn't necessarily be hurt too bad if they bet on this system and lost, who also happened to seriously hate flames on the side of my face burning the other 2 players in this space. So that's why Namco takes the chance where no one else will and goes deep, giving them everything, joint developing coin-op hardware as well, the System 11, and that works out pretty well for everybody involved.
Yeah. And what we also can't forget here, which I think is extremely important, because Namco has strong ties with Atari, they've also been working on 3D games for years. They're one of those 3 players. Yes. It's Atari Games, Namco, and Sega that have really been making a lot of 3D games in the arcades. They're not having to invent solutions to 3D game development problems.
Yep, right. And not only did they get that huge head start through Atari, but just as Sega cut a deal with General Electric to use their top-of-the-line defense contractor military simulator technology, so too did Namco cut a deal with Evans and Sutherland, a similar deal. So they were also getting help from the cream of the crop of the American military-industrial complex that suddenly needed new clients after that whole Cold War thing that they'd been living off of for half a century was kind of going away.
Exactly. So there's a lot of players involved suddenly all at once. And it's like you said, there's long-standing rivalries, and the idea of somebody who's going to change up the entire game plan is music to certain people's ears.
Exactly, and people are only going to get more excited about that game-changing stuff coming from Sony as Sony reveals PSX stats.
Sony has shown off some of its upcoming system stats. The price will be below $480. It will launch in Japan in December of 1994, have a 32-bit RISC processor, multiple coprocessors, be CD-ROM only, process 360,000 polygons per second, have more RAM than the 3DO, and be able to display compressed video at 60 frames per second.
Of course, that's 360,000 polygons per second when you don't have textures and shading and lighting and particle effects and all of that, which cuts it in half. And, of course, even though it has a lot of RAM, you're only going to get 2 megabytes of video RAM, which will be this ridiculous bottleneck between the CPU and the display. But having said all of that, it is still an impressive piece of kit, especially compared to what the current competition is looking at doing in the marketplace. But it has always been Sony's strategy to kind of shock and awe with the initial announcement, just to scare everyone away. The PlayStation 2 is probably the most notorious system that they did this with, but they really do it with all of their systems, and they're doing it here as well. It's impressive, but it's not quite as impressive as this would make you think. However, this is what completely scared the shit out of Sony out of Sega when it was privately revealed several months before this. The industry already knew before this, just the press hadn't gotten wind. When they saw these specs and caused them to go into their panic mode on the Saturn and how it was designed.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we talked last month about Sega's announcement that the Saturn was getting an additional processor. And it's clearly a reaction to this. Because this is clearly saying, we're doing polygons and only polygons. And, oh yeah, those cartridges that you need for all those sprites, yeah, we're not caring about those anymore. We're doing polygons, baby.
And, it is a game changer, even if it really was only rendering about half that many polygons in actual games.
Well, and in their defense, if you look at the games that are out in the arcades, textures really aren't an issue yet. I mean, we got Virtua Racer, we've got Virtua Fighter, we've got what Namco's got out up till now. I mean, Ridge Racer just came out. Ridge Racer is brand new in the arcades. That's the first real example of lots of textures. A couple of people have gotten demos in Japan of Daytona. It's been out on test, but it hasn't had a wide release yet. So
exactly,
for the average gamer, it's polygons. We're not thinking in terms yet of, wait, you can put textures on polygons? What's that all about?
Right. And meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, NEC reveals PCFX stats.
NEC, makers of the PC Engine and Duo systems, has revealed that their NEC system will be known simply as the FX. Be 32-bit, CD-ROM only, not backward compatible, and be able to do streaming interactive video at 30 frames per second. The system will cost about $480, and they expect to sell 800,000 units by the end of 1994.
And I thought Sony's claim of 360,000 polygons per second was ridiculous, Carl.
Well, this is now
800,000, by the end of this year. That seems like a pretty big number for those specs there.
You think. Now, this is the funny part. This system, anybody who knows about what the FX ends up becoming, and it's a bit of a flop, to put it nicely, this system has been ghosting around in the industry at trade shows and whatnot for a couple of years. It was called the Luthor. And all of the articles I found this month about this, and some of these screenshots I actually remember from back in the day from previews, are showing 3D models. And there's a screenshot of a 3D Formula 1 style racing game supposedly running on the PCFX hardware, included in the Electronic Gaming Monthly article about the system, and the Edge magazine has a screenshot of the Super Star Soldier 3D. That's a 3D update of an existing Hudson Soft shooter series, and it's an open 3D flight game. So it's actually flying over this cityscape with green hills and a lake and all this stuff. Now, these graphics, as far as I can tell, have no textures or extremely few textures on them. I think there's a little bit of a texture visible on the Formula 1 road, but everything else just looks like polygons moving. According to the articles, it's very smooth, open world. You can go left, right, do whatever you want. The fact that the same exact screenshots are showing up, it's clear that the journalists didn't take the screenshots, but it sounds like they were playing something that was being processed in real time. The actual effects that get shipped doesn't have those 3D capabilities anymore. So It's a little bit of speculation, but it almost looks like, and here the fact that they're talking about $480, it must have been a nice round number in Japanese terms. I get the feeling, again, a little speculation, Sony did to the PCFX what they will later do to the Sega Saturn at E3. They basically waited for NEC to give a number, and they're like, oh, ours will be less than whatever they said. It just feels that way.
It does. I agree. And, just to add speculation on top of your speculation, because I have no evidence of this whatsoever, but I do wonder with this removal of 3D thing, NEC is primarily a computer company, and in this period, multimedia and FMV is all the rage in computers. And of course, Fujitsu's going to do the FM Towns Marty coming out soon. And I think NEC probably, because, as I said in my podcast, we talked about it a little bit, everyone was very confused about where the market was going to go next. And a lot of companies that were already in the business, like Sega, kind of fell back on what they knew, as opposed to a newcomer like Sony, who dared to seize the future. And I have to wonder if NEC didn't get kind of mesmerized by the whole FMV craze that's going on computer hardware right now, and thought that their niche was going to be bringing that to consoles, which, spoiler alert, not a great niche to be in.
Well, and that's what I was thinking as well. And my speculation went in a slightly different direction, which was, I don't think that they thought that they could bring the hardware in under budget and at the right price if it was able to do both.
Oh, I agree with that as well. No, I absolutely.
Because...
No, they had to choose.
They had to choose.
And choose wisely.
Well, and this is the thing. Sony at this point has not shown any demos of what their software can actually, what their hardware can actually do. But...
I'm not publicly. I think the T-Rex demo has already been making the rounds by this point amongst developers. Because there is lag between what developers get to see behind NDAs and what makes into the press. I think the T-Rex demo is already a thing.
So here's the big question. If, let's say, texturing, if the PCFX hardware wasn't going to be able to do texturing, it was going to look old in comparison, even if it could do more polygons. It was going to look old. They may have just looked at it going, you know what? We can't compete on this. There's a very high likelihood that interactive video is really the future, let's just bet on that. Instead of making it too expensive, which is what Sega did. They priced themselves out of the market by trying to keep the 2D, keep the 3D, and Sony, put all its eggs in one basket. If Sony had guessed wrong, if Sony had put everything on, we're going to be the guys doing 3D, it would have blown up in their face.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, they've gone this far, but this system was also in development for a very long time. They waited too long to release it. Had they released that hardware a year earlier, 3D capable, no textures, they would have already had a lead on everybody. They could have already done a price reduced version by the time the PlayStation hit.
Well, and it would have been the PC Engine playbook, right? Because the PC Engine, compared to a true 16-bit system, like the Genesis or the Super Nintendo, was inferior, but it launched in 1987 when its competition was just the 8-bit systems. It had a couple of hot ports like R-Type that got it established by the time those other systems came out, and so the PC Engine in Japan was incredibly successful. It was second place. They beat Sega. Didn't do anything in the rest of the world, but and you're right that possibly they could have found a similar successful path if they had released something like this just a little earlier, just as the PC Engine found a place as kind of a small upgrade that came out at just the right time.
Yeah. But it's going to come out without the 3D hardware. It's going to just be all about that interactive video, and we're going to be talking a lot about interactive video later in the show, people. There's a lot of interactive video coming. And it's only going to get a handful of games. They're infamous for dating simulator type, the Japanese incel stuff. And it's just sad.
And I believe it sells less than 10% of that 1994 projection over its entire life. I think it comes in about 70,000 units or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it's sad. It gets I think less than 20 games. It's just bad.
Yeah.
And that also the end of NEC in this business.
Well, in this business, NEC is doing just fine over there. But speaking of companies entering with new hardware, Neo Geo enters CD-ROM race.
SNK has announced that they will be launching CD-ROM hardware for their Neo Geo arcade and home platforms. The system is said to have 7 megabits of DRAM, more than any other prospective contender, and will be launched in June of 1994 in the arcades. SNK president, and I'm going to kill it, Aikichi Kawasaki? Probably, right?
I mean, I'm not an expert on Japanese pronunciation, but that is how I would pronounce it, though I often mispronounce Japanese.
There you go.
There you have it.
Said prices for software, presumably for the home, would undercut current cartridge software in Japan at 7,000 to 8,000 yen. So, we're finally going to have affordable Neo Geo games, everybody.
Hooray! All we have to do is buy an unaffordable add-on to the core hardware.
Yay! Well, I mean, do they launch the CD drive as an add-on or as a standalone unit? I want to say it's a standalone, isn't it?
I mean, you could be right. I'm not up on my Neo Geo.
But it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a single-speed drive. That will be
which is always the Achilles heel. Yeah. And, at least they don't compound their mistake by, in the way so many companies do, by also including virtually no RAM. I mean, no amount of RAM is going to offset a horrible one-speed CD-ROM drive, but better to have 7 megabits than, than a lot less than that.
Well, but even then, the Neo Geo, with its reliance on these very, very elaborate sprites, because the hardware has no backgrounds. Everything on the screen is a sprite. You need to be constantly accessing that cartridge and pulling more data down. And the CD is going to be notorious for very long load times, for interrupting stuff to load more. And yeah, it's going to be a price conscious, but still not very effective solution. Yeah, it comes out as a standalone unit. There's no CD.
Yeah, I knew it was a standalone unit, but I couldn't remember if they also had an upgrade for existing systems, and they did not.
Nope. But I mean, the system's already a few years old at this point. It wasn't too expensive when it came out. Oh wait, no, $400?
Oh no. Yeah, I mean,
wow.
They had to stick a lot of memory in there, and this was a period when memory was not cheap.
True.
Which was what hamstrung a lot of these companies as well. As this is a year or two before this, but when Trip Hawkins said when they were releasing the 3DO, one of the problems, I mean, there were many reasons why their price was ridiculous, but one of the problems was it was one of the few periods of time when memory prices were going up instead of going down, and this was a real problem. Probably in part, I don't know this because I haven't looked into the economics, but probably in part due to that strengthening yen, because at this time, a lot of the world's memory was still manufactured in Japan. It hadn't migrated to other parts of Asia yet.
Yeah, we're going to see a whole bunch of memory plants come online, I believe, in South Korea in the next year or two. And then you're just going to see memory prices crash.
Yep.
Really, really quickly.
Absolutely. But speaking of old technology, still kind of lingering around, the Connex multi-system is back.
The doomed Connex multi-system, the last great European hope for a role in the console gaming hardware market, which died a few years back, is back. Former Connex engineers, now under the name MSU, have teamed up with Taiwanese company TXC to release a new CD-based Connex multi-system to be shown at the Winter CES, according to the UK's Edge magazine. The system will be based around an x86 chip with an added Blitter and Texas Instruments DSP chip for sound and 3D rotation routines. Yeah.
Good for it. Good for it.
Yeah. I mean, the legacy of the Connex, as we've talked about in previous episodes, is the Atari Jaguar. A lot of those people from that team go on to make the Jaguar. People who were developing one of the lead games for the original Connex, a port of Last Ninja 2, are also the ones who make the pack-in title for the Jaguar, Cybermorph, which we'll talk more about in a moment. And now there's a few guys who are like, we can still do this. And yeah, needless to say, this is not going to happen.
Yes. Arrested Development narrator. They can't.
Exactly. I mean, I guess, we need a system that has a joystick. It's also a flight yoke, which is also something else.
But, it's interesting because this was the last period of time, the last time where it felt like the console industry was in reach, where it felt to smaller companies that they could still get a little dev team together and spin up a console. Now, obviously, none of those consoles were successful. It's only the consoles by the big companies that had lots of money behind them that actually succeeded. But this is the last time you see this many companies throwing their hats into the ring with what they hope to be a frontline console. I'm not talking about things like plug-and-play systems and budget stuff.
You're not including the Ouya in all this?
Yeah. Which is why we're seeing all of these companies, Neo Geo's upgrading, and the PC Engine is upgrading to the PCFX, and Conix is trying to come back in, and and there's 3DO still out there, and Jaguar's still out
CDI,
there,
and CD32,
and Capcom's gonna throw a few CPS2 boards inside a plastic shell and release them, and just about every company that didn't make a console seriously looked into it, like Konami and Taito and Namco. All of them had console developments going on, and I think that's another way that Sony just changed the market, because then Sony comes in as the Death Star and is like, oh yeah, we'll lose a couple of $100 million just to buy market share, and that was it for any small company ever having aspirations of even trying to break in to the console hardware business.
Very, very, very true.
We'll look at one more piece of advanced technology that maybe is not going as well as everyone hopes, as Sega delays. You can't see the quotes, but I tried to make you hear them. Sega VR.
Sega's VR helmet, which seems to make an appearance in every single newspaper article about the VR phenomenon, has been delayed until later in 1994. The software for it may just not be ready yet to justify a $200 peripheral.
Yeah, think.
Yeah.
At this point, a Genesis, we have to remember, costs less than $150.
And it's not really known for fluid 3D images.
No.
And there's no way to put an extra processor inside the helmet.
No. Yeah, delays. Lovely.
Yeah, it's been delayed. We're still waiting.
Moving on then to away from all this fancy schmancy future stuff to current gen console technology. Video game monopoly inquiry begun in the United Kingdom.
The UK anti-monopoly regulator has begun an investigation into the duopoly that is Sega and Nintendo in the UK. Not only are the massive market shares of the two companies, with Sega controlling 2/3 of the console market and Nintendo controlling 65% of the handheld market, way beyond the 25% market share normally defined as a monopoly, but there have been numerous complaints about the very high cost of hardware and software in the UK, sometimes close to double the prices for the same product in the US.
I mean, you all had your chances to buy your C64 GSs and Amstrad GX4000s, and I don't think y'all did. So, and I don't think it's because Nintendo and Sega, strong-armed them out of the market.
No. But they do have a point with those extremely high prices. There's a little bit of, there's obviously issues with these are smaller markets. You have to budget in marketing for each of the territories.
Yeah,
and stuff.
They don't, the companies don't tend to have very robust manufacturing in Europe. A lot of it is coming from great distances from other parts of the world. Distribution is very fragmented, so you don't get the same level of bulk savings, on bulk purchases through distribution and retail, because a lot of the continent, outside of UK and Germany, the continent is still very fragmented in its retail distribution scene. So there are some reasons that aren't just monopoly.
Well, and we also have to remember that there's issues concerning taxes, sales taxes. So when they're comparing,
well, exactly, just half of that extra price is just the damn VAT.
Yeah, Well, because the sales price for American listeners, when the sales price that's advertised already includes the sales tax. And for European listeners, when you see a sales price in the United States, it's before sales tax. They're going to tack that on afterwards. And depending on where you live...
An American sales tax is like usually in this time period, between like 4 and 7% or something. It's not the VAT.
No, it's not the VAT, but you're still talking 4 to 7%. I mean, an extra 7% on the top, it's a chunk of change.
No, that would bring it closer, absolutely, in the prices. But what I'm saying is, like, just because of the VAT, it's always going to be more expensive in Europe because they just do taxes differently there. They're still stuck in the cottage industry days when everyone was spinning their cotton at home and then passing it along to the weavers. And
that is very, very, very true.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously there are things that Nintendo has done that have been very monopolistic in the past, and there are things that Sony has done that have been very monopolistic in the past, but this is mostly smoke and no fire. The fact that there are two viable competitors in the video game industry there, and not one just completely shellacking the other, is a pretty good sign that the competition is pretty robust and healthy. And like I said, there were plenty of homegrown also-ran consoles that were just bad.
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely truth in that. So much truth in that.
And speaking of, CDI finally gets digital video.
I was just thinking of the Odyssey. Okay, so Philips has finally launched their digital video add-on for CDI. Unfortunately, the weaknesses of MPEG-encoded video on CD are apparent as the demo disc, featuring scenes from Top Gun, can often become a blurry mess due to the keyframe system used by MPEG encoding. Philips assured Edge magazine, though, that hasty encoding was to blame, and the actual 16-pound-a-piece movies will not suffer from this problem. Yeah.
Pro tip for you marketers out there, if you don't have a system that can handle a high-resolution video very well, don't pick a movie to showcase it that is moving at, like, jet speeds at all times.
Yeah, with lots and lots of cuts between scenes making your keyframes really problematic.
Pick a nice costume drama.
Well, the costume drama would require even more detail. They were probably hoping the blue eyes were going to save them on data.
I guess. I don't know. But yeah, and, just finally even getting video with this. Yeah, CDI is just, I mean...
Yeah.
It was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is the legacy of the CDI. They meant well, but they were always in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Have you ever tried to watch a movie on one of these MPEG CDs?
No, but I do remember the days of streaming real media files over the internet, and I imagine the experience is rather similar.
Rather similar. I actually saw, this was the little Amiga shop in Seattle I used to go to all the time. I actually saw Naked Gun 22.5 running...
2.5.
Was it 2.5? Yeah, 2.5.
2.5, 33 and a third.
33 and a quarter. And it was...
No, 33 and a third.
Right. It was running on a CD32 with the MPEG encoder. And it was like, okay, it sort of looks okay, but you could totally tell the fragments in the corners and stuff. And it was just like, why would I pay money for this when the VHS costs less?
Another CD32, another one of those fine homegrown consoles competing with that evil Nintendo Sega monopoly.
Developed in the U.S. Come on.
I know it was developed in the U.S., but they were developing it for the UK market. They were not developing it for the U.S. market.
But they
didn't have a
showed it at
U.S.
the World
market
of
at that
Commodore. It's in all the American magazines as a contender that's coming. It's coming, right? Okay, wait. That we're getting ahead of ourselves. We will talk about that shortly.
Hold on now. Hold your horses there. First, we have to talk about how Atari test markets expanded.
After a launch in New York, which had a big party but no actual consoles on offer, Atari has decided to also test launch the Jaguar in Paris and London, giving European fans hope they may still get their mitts on the device in 1993.
Sounds to me like they had so much fun in their party in New York that they wanted to go to some other happening party towns and also not bring consoles with them.
Yeah, Edge magazine actually talks about how they had money in hand and they were hoping to buy a console at the party. But other than the display units that people could test, there were no machines to be bought, and there were no machines in the stores in New York. Because the shipment hadn't made it to New York in time for the party. There's this great photo of Sam Trammell and Jack Trammell surrounded by people dressed as the characters from Trevor McFur.
Yes, I am aware.
And some poor woman with a bald cap and green face paint who was the computer AI from Cybermorph. I guess she was running around telling drunk people, who taught you how to fly?
And let me tell you, that party must have been something. The substances must have been flowing because Edge fawns over Cybermorph, and there is no other explanation for this happening.
Oh, there's an explanation, but we'll get into that in a moment. So, Atari's Pac-In game gets its first review by Edge magazine, and they fawn over the UK-produced title. Somehow, they did not get annoyed by Skylar, the AI assistant. They found the controls good once you got used to them. Yeah, even though they said you'd lose your first 3 lives in about a minute, your first go-around. And the pod picking up game mechanic didn't get old for them. 8 out of 10.
I mean, prison improves a little once you get used to it too, Edge.
Yeah, this really is one of those moments which German game reviewers used to like to talk about, where UK magazines will give a pass to UK developed titles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, honestly, it doesn't happen that as often as they would say, but you get this feeling that the developer attention to detail. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to say you're cool, you're probably not.
I agree.
They're giving him the benefit of the doubt. And there's a couple of other reviews this month for Cybermorph, and Cybermorph does not get off this easy in most other publications.
I would think not.
I mean, some of them still talk about how, it's a nice demo of the technology and blah, 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 blah. And you can tell that it's an early 3D game because I couldn't find a single mention of the pop-up being a problem. Nowadays, looking at it, you're just like, how can you play this? The pop-up. Exactly. I remember playing it back in the 94. I had a problem with the pop-up. But apparently, they don't have a problem with the pop-up yet.
I'm telling you, all they got to do is play it at the big party, and when you're under the influence, you do not notice the pop-up, is what I am saying.
This is probably true. Now, curiously enough, they do get 2 other scores very, very right in this magazine. Secret of Mana gets a 9 out of 10. And Myst gets 6 out of 10. Which I find perfectly appropriate.
I mean, hey, you can kill Santa Claus in Secret of Mana. I mean, you don't actually kill him; you just break the spell. But it sounds better my way.
Well, you probably kill him in the original Japanese version. But hey,
And finally, we end our look at consoles with Atari sues Sega.
Oh, yes. Atari Corporation, the makers of the Jaguar, have filed a suit against Sega over alleged patent infringement of patents stemming from the 1980s. While Atari said they have been in negotiations with Sega, they felt the suit was necessary.
Translation, we need money now.
Yeah, exactly. It really is one of those moments, and I actually teach the last 3 Atari Corporation annual reports in one of my classes. I use them as a way to analyze language, especially the letters from the CEO and how they try to spin news and stuff. It's wonderful because the product line is so limited in those last 3 years that it's easy to get a good overview of the whole company in a relatively short time. And,
but the suit will be very successful.
The suit will be very successful. It's going to give them a chunk of change, which is going to help them in their final dissolution of the company.
Exactly.
So it's a very important moment for the history, which is also going to help show the path forward for the assets and for Atari as an entity. So this is why I thought it was very important to mention it here.
Oh, I agree. And we should also mention that these patents were related to scrolling.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yes.
All right. We now go from the courtroom to a different branch of government as Lieberman bill a hidden threat during Senate hearings.
The Senate hearings on video game violence, which we covered extensively in our commentary track on the hearings and here on the show, were held in the shadow of a draft bill that Senators Cole and Lieberman had already written and distributed to, among others, the AAMA, the Association of Coin-Op Manufacturers. The National Independent Council for Entertainment in Video Devices Act of 1993 would resurface again in February as the Video Game Rating Act of 1994 and would have called for a commission to be formed by the President to coordinate with the video game industry the creation of a ratings system. And so this is coming out of a citation in Playmeter magazine of the AAMA's response to the hearings, to the hearings being called. So the AAMA did not have a representative at the hearings, and instead they sent this letter, and that's where they talk about how this law is probably a good idea, or the idea behind the law is a good idea, but, we don't really need this because we're going to create our own rating system with blackjack and hookers.
That's right.
Or
fatalities and vampires.
Exactly. And the idea, and this is something I think we didn't mention in our commentary, that this draft legislation already existed at the time of the hearings.
Yeah, and I mean it's pretty, because it's pretty simple legislation. It's just saying, hey, we're going to form this thing, and of course it's draft legislation, which means it didn't have to go up to a vote anywhere. But the Cole and Lieberman did want to make sure that the video game industry realized they were serious about seeing action here, and they didn't want to take action, but they would much rather have the video game industry do it themselves, but they just wanted to let them know this is here waiting for you if you make us do it.
Exactly. Now, according to the Wikipedia page for this whole thing, Lieberman later on said, hey, if they create the thing, I never intended to go forward with this, but it puts it for me in a slightly different perspective that this plan to force them to create a rating system under government supervision was out there, because God only knows what they would have forced them to add to.
Well, exactly. And that's the thread, right? Nobody wants another Hays Code.
Yeah. A Hays Code or Comics Code Authority. I mean,
yes.
Imagine if you had those rules. Oh,
exactly.
And by the way, we're coming up, I believe, on the 60th anniversary of that this year. We'll be talking about that later in the year.
Fun. But meanwhile, across the pond, they needed no such coercion as ELSPA agrees on rating system.
The European Leisure Software Publishers Association, or ELSPA, has agreed on a rating system up to 10, 11 to 14, 15 to 17, and over 18. Publishers will submit a questionnaire detailing different types of potentially objectionable material together with the game in question to the Video Standards Council, which will review the game and give a final rating. This system will eventually morph into the current PEGI system.
Yep, I mean, everyone realizes it's time. I mean, obviously, we've done this to death since we've talked about it so much, but the graphics are now sophisticated enough, the audience is now diverse enough in terms of age range, that it is just time to have a rating system. I don't have any problem with that, personally.
No, me neither. I mean, it really is one of those moments where you kind of need to let people know what the product is, and it also just helps the consumer know what they're getting into. I mean, if you don't like horror, you don't necessarily want to buy something that's going to try to scare the crap out of you. It's just the nature of the beast.
Agreed. Moving on then from violence to computers, X marks the spot for CD-ROM drives.
The battle over CD-ROM drive speeds is heating up. 2X is quickly becoming standard and necessary for smooth video playback. But Pioneer is already selling a 4X external drive, and NEC is experimenting with 6 and 8X drives. But Dan Johnson, an NEC product manager, warns that at some point CD-ROM capacity may become a bigger issue than transfer speed.
Yeah. I remember the Speed Wars very well. The first time that I ever got a game that my system couldn't handle was Wing Commander 4. I think we only had a 2-speed drive. We might have had a 4-speed, but it was definitely no higher than that. And Wing Commander at that time needed more like a 12-speed. So stutter.
Yeah, I mean, it's... and he's also right about the quantity. I mean, 640 megs seemed like an ungodly amount of space just a couple years earlier. But as soon as you start throwing a lot of video on there, I mean, Wing Commander 3 is coming down the pipeline. It's going to be 3 discs. So, get ready, people.
Absolutely, and that's not the only thing you should get ready for with CDs, because Sony launches CDR.
The Sony CDW99E is an external SCSI device that can burn CDs at single or double speed. Granted, it's still a bit pricey at almost $9,000.
But that thing that everyone's afraid of, that thing that Nintendo is quaking in their boots about, is here. Easy pirating of CD-ROM. Expensive, but relatively easy. Yeah. And it'll only come down in price.
Yeah, I mean, it's by no means the first CD burner that ever was.
Oh, no.
But this thing, it's burning at double speed. It's literally purchasable by everyday people if you want to spend that much money.
And it's Sony, which means it's going to become a standard, which just makes it so much easier to get access to the needed materials and to drive costs down due to bulk adoption.
Exactly. I mean, once this starts hitting the mainstream, it's just a matter of time.
And speaking of standards, PCI becomes the new standard.
In the increasingly PC-focused world of computer gaming, the need to stay on top of not just the latest processors and video cards is key, but also the fundamental architecture of one's motherboard. The aging VESA... do we pronounce it VESA or VESA back then?
It's probably VESA.
Yeah. VESA bus standard has become a bottleneck for systems, and the full power of the Pentium chips being incorporated into many an Christmas PC is slowing those machines down. So get your wallet ready for another upgrade, Johnny.
We're getting so close to plug and play. It sets my heart aflutter, Carl.
Yes. And you're jumping ahead a few stories because the key component to that is just coming down the pipeline. But it's this idea that you can't just keep putting new stuff on the same old motherboard. It's the constant upgrading of the damn PC.
Yes. And it needs to be better. The upgrading needs to be better. Fewer jumpers. Definitely fewer jumpers.
Thank goodness I never had to deal with that. I was still an Amiga kid at this point.
You can't make upgrading difficult if you don't let me upgrade. Anyway, moving on, Tandy expands retail presence.
After having dumped its manufacturing operations, Tandy, the parent company of Radio Shack, is expanding some of its other retail brands, mainly Computer City and Incredible Universe. Both of these are big box stores. The cash infusion from the sale of their manufacturing operations, which we talked about a month or so ago, has helped Tandy pay off debts and finance an expansion into an ever more competitive retail space for computers and electronics.
Thank goodness we will always need stores to make purchases, Carl.
Yeah.
At least we have that.
Why manufacture your own stuff? Because, the real money's in that middleman function. So, Tandy, they're pivoting completely to being a retailer, and this idea of, you got to keep buying more products for your computer or just buy the whole damn box. It's not a bad business to be in when, the superhighway comes. I can almost see the logic of it, but there's not going to be a consistent brand, and there's a reason why some of these chains are relatively easy for them to buy because,
Exactly.
By the time you put it on a retail shelf, Gateway 2000 has already upgraded the models that they're selling by mail order.
Indeed. Moving on, though, to the elitist segment of the market, Apple adds DOS board.
So you have a tiny sliver of the market. You want to gain greater acceptance? Just graft a competitor's hardware onto your system. Apple is planning on doing that with its DOS boards for Quadra Macs. The DOS boards are basically complete DOS 486 motherboards that can either have their own RAM or piggyback off of the Mac hardware. So you can get your low-end Mac with a low-end PC, all for just $2,000. This is what it should cost according to Byte Magazine. The final price of the base version, launched in February of 94, was $1,579.
Yeah, and this just goes to show that leadership is floundering and the company is out of ideas, because and this is speculation, but I think what they did is like, hey, remember that time when we put Z80 boards in for the CPM? I bet that we could do the same thing here with the DOSes.
Yeah, it feels a lot like that. Now, I didn't do any research into how well these worked or what other problems there were with upgrading them, etc., etc., etc. But, a 486 at this point is already very quickly becoming outdated.
Yeah.
And there's really no point in having this in the system.
No, there's really not, because the transition to Pentium was pretty monumental and pretty all-encompassing. Like, again, they're kind of looking at the past because, when the 386 machines started coming out, there was still a lot of 286 machines. When the 486 machines came out, there was still a lot of 386 machines. But there is an increased rapidity in the turnover from 486 to Pentium mostly because Intel does such a great job of marketing the Pentium as something you can't do without in the modern computer marketplace. And so, yeah, the 486 is already stale, even by the beginning of 1994.
Yeah, especially, and the Mac users, they don't really want it. I mean, the whole point of being a Mac user is that you're not a DOS user.
Exactly.
It's like, you'd be giving in, admitting that you need it. And that's just
stupidest Macintosh board ever. But don't worry, Carl, because Apple is in some ways looking towards the future as Mac gamers get Y2K preview.
Players of certain Sierra Adventure games such as Leisure Suit Larry 5 and Freddy Farkas got a little preview of Y2K when their games simply stopped working on September 18th, 1993. A bug in the software did not allow the games to run past this date. A patch has been released on Prodigy, AOL Genie, and CompuServe, or is available on disk. Or you can just reset the computer's clock to the 17th.
How fun. How charming.
Yeah. This one was one of those fun little stories where I was just like, okay, why is a program like Leisure Suit Larry even bothering to look at the clock? What is it? Because there's no way it looked clock on the Amiga version or on the PC version. What about the Mac version required it to look at the clock? There's got to be something in the Mac version, probably because they were already bricking the Macs at this point. It was like, well, after this date, you got to upgrade your operating system and everything's just going to run slower because you got to sell a new one. Sorry, I'm still ticked off that they bricked my iPhone. So, okay.
Moving on, though, Chicago enters beta.
Microsoft's upcoming Windows update, codenamed Chicago, has entered beta testing. Unlike NT, which had a very public beta, though, Chicago's beta testing is being done in secret.
Yeah, because it's still so rough that they don't want all the bad press that would come from a public beta of Chicago at this point, which was, I think, at this point still supposed to launch in 94, and obviously that did not happen.
Yeah. I mean, they haven't. I haven't seen any real concrete launch date, so and there's a lot that they have to work out, but let's be honest, when it does launch, and we're talking about Windows 95 here, when it does finally launch, those jumpers, a thing of the past, that plug and play, it's so sweet.
Da-na-na-na. Na-na-na. And I'll stop there before we get sued by the Rolling Stones rock and roll band. And speaking of things the one can get sued over, Novell gives up Unix trademark.
Novell, the holders of the Unix trademark, have given it up to the International X-Open Standards Organization. While they will still hold licensing rights to the Unix System 5 source code, once a new host of test suites and APIs have been agreed upon, they will be open, creating hopefully a new single standard for Unix that all can use.
Yep, there we go. It's just one hop, skip, and a jump from there to Linux.
Actually, well, preview of what's going to happen in the March 1994 jump. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's not going to take long, people.
Nope. Not at all. But while things are looking up in the open source and Windows computing environments, Commodore numbers are bad.
There's no way to sugarcoat it. Commodore's 1993 fiscal year, which ended in June of 93, saw the company lose $356 million, and the first quarter of the new fiscal year, ending in September of 93, saw it lose another $9.7 million. The company has cut overhead dramatically, which helps stop the bleeding a bit, but the discontinuation of their PC business, write-downs on inventory, and restructuring costs have cost them in a big way. The company is now facing $61.2 million in negative equity, based in part on a loan given to it by TCP, a company owned by major shareholder Irving Gould, who, according to a proxy filing from January 19th, 1994, had been granted a ton of stock options in the company. The annual report stated that the firm's financial position and operating results raised substantial doubts about their ability to continue as a going concern.
Yep. It's kind of fitting that, we have this, and then in our 40-year jump, we had the Trammell departure, because really what's happening right now, it was really already being set in motion at the time Jack was leaving. I mean, obviously there were opportunities along the way where that process could have been reversed that weren't taken, but basically it's been one solid decline for the last 10 years. It didn't necessarily look like a decline in every one of those years if you're just looking at the raw numbers, but this is where we end up.
Yeah. Now, this proxy statement from January of 94, I read through it. There's some interesting tidbits in there. There's a thing that they call the plan, which was apparently something started in October of 84, whereby Irving Gould would be given a huge chunk of stock every year going forward. And this continues to give him this controlling share of stock in the company, gives him rights to all sorts of stuff. He's also pulling down like $750,000 a year in salary as his job as an officer of the company. Now, in fiscal 93, he dropped that down to like $200,000 because of the bad numbers they had that year. And the CEO of the company, I can't remember his name, a guy who had originally been brought in as a consultant, he was making $1 million a year, but he got that cut down to $750,000. And yeah, it's basically, and you've mentioned this several times. I mean, Irving Gould is using Commodore stock and Commodore to finance his very posh quality of life.
Exactly.
Jet setting around the Bahamas and stuff. And that gravy train is over. Commodore no longer is producing enough cash to do this. And so when that big meeting comes that was being set up through the proxy statement, that's pretty much going to be the end of it.
But, I'm pretty sure this was the plan all along. I mean, Gould was financially savvy enough to know that the way they were running the company couldn't keep the gravy train going forever, but that's why he was giving himself all of this stock all of these years so that he could slowly over time leverage that to diversify himself and continue maintaining some kind of lifestyle without having to be reliant on Commodore anymore. So, I mean, his goal had always been to cut costs to the bone and run it as cheaply as possible, to make the overhead as low as possible, to make the quarterly figures look as good as possible, whether the company was actually doing a good job or not. And, he's dead now, so he can't sue me. So I think it's fair to say that I am speculating, but it's not a big leap to say that I think he was probably always planning to run Commodore into the ground. I think that was probably the goal. Just do it slowly enough. I mean, he didn't want to do it immediately. He wanted it to be successful enough for a while that he could use the stock to diversify his investments. But yeah, I think that was the plan, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was as long as it was turning a profit, it was okay. That profit is gone because, let's face it, the PC business has overtaken everything else. The Amiga doesn't really have a future as a commercially viable product, and the CD32 was the last hope for it. I looked through some of the sales figures and stuff because there's going to be a document put together of assets for the bankruptcy that we'll be talking about in a few months here, and they're showing that ultimately they only sold 80,000 CD32s, and there's no way that they're going to be able to make their money back on any of this at this point. So he's going to now get whatever he can. This loan that TCP gave the company, I don't know how much it was, and I don't know what the financials are, but I can imagine that it helped solidify his ability to get money out of the company first.
Exactly.
Over other debtors. And yeah, the bleeding's done, and then it's just going to be sold off to Escom, and then later to Gateway, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. But before it goes away completely, we do have one more bit of significant Commodore adjacent news to announce, which is that a C64 emulator beta released.
The first proper C64 emulator for the PC has been tested as a beta by German 64 magazine. German developer Micromedia's program will let you relive the best of times on your PC. Granted, you'll have to set up a bunch of timing switches to make sure your hardware works right with the emulator, and you'll have to get the programs on there with a special cable that will be available later with the full price version or through existing utilities. And you'll need a Pentium to get about 87% speed running on those programs that will run, or if you're the editor of 64 magazine, just boot up a C64. Now, I include this not because it's the first C64 emulator that ever was, or even the first emulator ever. I mean, going back to the 60s, there's emulators for the IBM systems. In the late 80s, in Japan on the FM towns, there's a couple of NES emulators, Famicom emulators. And on the Amiga, already a few years earlier, programming legend Randy Linden had actually made a C64 emulator for ReadySoft that was made available. But the key here is, number one, this is on the PC. It's the first major microcomputer emulator on the PC that actually plays games, and they're distributing it on BBSs. And this is really the moment. This is the moment, as far as I can tell, when the modern emulation scene is born. Because over the next couple of months in the German magazines, we're going to see this program pop up on cover CDs. We're going to see games like Elite and others show up on it. There's going to suddenly be a reason to distribute these disk images. We're going to see a solidifying of the formats. I don't know if this particular 64 emulator actually ever goes anywhere beyond this. But within the next year or so, we're going to see C64S, then we're going to see Frodo, then we're going to see Vice, and then we're going to see, by 96, we see this explosion in the online community, Nesticle, Genesis, and all the others coming out. This is the moment where the PC becomes the place for retro systems to live again, and all of that software distribution, especially in the days of very, very slow internet connections, where you're not going to be necessarily pirating Wing Commander 3, but you can definitely download a copy of Elite that's only 64K. So it's
absolutely,
it's a huge moment.
It is.
I didn't read this issue of 64, but I did read an adjacent article that comes out a month or two later in the German magazine PC Player. And I'll be honest with you, that was a moment that changed my life forever. Because when I sold my C64 to buy my Amiga 500, there was a real pang. I remember telling my friends, I was like, I'm giving up all these games that are not available on the Amiga. They're simply gone. There's no way to go back to them anymore. It was like when you went to an arcade and the machine that you loved playing was simply not there anymore. And this creates the world we live in today where every game is always available. Pretty much. I mean, there's still exceptions, but this is the beginning of that, and it's a whole new realm. What we do would not be possible without this kind of movement.
No, absolutely not. And, I, being a little younger, it was a little later till I got into the emulation scene, but I remember when I realized that Nesticle was a thing and that I could get all of the NES games that I had missed the first time around. And then, Jeffrey, my co-host on the podcast and best friend going way back, like, I immediately, called him up and was like, you've got to come over and see this, and then showed him Dragon Quest 2, or Dragon Warrior 2, as they called it back then, which we could never find back in the day, and we were huge Dragon Warrior people, they're running on my PC, and it was like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. It's, there is... It was Steam before Steam, a million games available, just for download. And yeah, the world of gaming will never be the same from this point forward.
Indeed. It feels like we should have probably ended computers on that poignant note, but we have one more that I cannot possibly transition to after that. So I'll just say that Activision gets reboot fever.
Well, I thought actually the transition here was going to be, talking about old games on modern systems.
But that's not really what a reboot is.
That's true. Okay, I will give you that. So, with Return to Zork racking up huge praise and reviews around the world this month, Activision is doubling down on its legacy IP by announcing 3 more reboots. Pitfall Harry, The Mayan Adventure, River Raid, The Mission of No Return, and Kaboom, The Return of the Mad Bomber.
Yeah, I mean, this is the early part of Kotick's time with the company, and as discussed on my own podcast when we did a 3-part look at those years. Activision had a lot of debt, no employees, and very few prospects, when he took it over. And so his first strategy to get them back on a sound financial footing was to just take everything that was in the Activision back catalog, or Infocom, since Activision owned Infocom, and put it out in some way, shape, or form, whether that be a compilation re-release or an updated version or a reboot of a franchise. And this is more example of that. Some were successful, some weren't, some I think didn't even come into existence in the end, but it gave the company the capital to become the juggernaut that it became in later years before being purchased by Microsoft, for better or for worse. Not commenting on that, just saying this is what started it, is just digging into that back catalog. And, that's something that Kotick recognized was very valuable at the company.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the only one of these 3 that actually comes out is the Pitfall Harry Mayan Adventure. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is a passable jump and run. It's not really a good game. It's pretty terrible, actually.
Yeah.
You haven't played it? Or
no, but I've seen it.
Yeah.
Because, I looked at all this stuff when we were doing our Kotick episodes. But
Yeah.
no, I never bothered playing it.
Yeah,
I was not of that generation. I never played. I mean, I played it now, but like back then, I never played the original Pitfall. So I didn't really care about Pitfall games.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't really feel like a Pitfall game anymore.
No.
It kind of felt like a blander, unfunny version of Earthworm Jim. But yeah, so
Well, it was done by the guy who did Fern Gully. So, a blander, less funny version of a Disney movie. So
there you go. The other two never make it out. I mean, Activision's going to find its next moneymaker with MechWarrior 2.
Yes.
Which is the other legacy franchise that they still have the rights to. And that's really going to pull them out. Then you get Interstate 76. And by then, they've got a bunch of other stuff. There's going to be a follow-up to Return to Zork. And they also start developing a bunch of new franchises.
Yeah, I mean, MechWarrior 2 is the next big one. And then the really big one from which they never look back is Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's, I mean, what? It's still like 3 years away, Tony Hawk?
Oh, yeah. It's still, exactly. No, MechWarrior 2 was an important bridge. Without MechWarrior 2, you don't get there. But I'm just, this isn't entirely successful, but it's kind of the end of the first phase because they had some successful compilations with the Infocom re-releases. They had the success of Return to Zork. They've stabilized the company, and now they're getting diminishing returns on that, and so they'll start pivoting into other areas.
True. Okay, so.
All right. Well, of course, it's January, and that means everyone is going to Vegas for the CES. And believe me, CES dominated by computers and games.
Nearly half the floor space at the winter CES in Vegas was dominated by multimedia computers and video games, according to the New York Times. Companies like 3DO, AT&T, Compaq, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, and Leading Edge showed off their wares. AT&T showed off their Edge 16, a modem for the Sega Genesis that would allow for multiplayer gaming. The modem is planned to hit the market in the fall for just $150. 3DO announced that Sanyo, AT&T, and a third unnamed company would soon launch their own 3DO boxes. RCA showed off digital satellite dishes with superior sound and picture quality than regular broadcast or cable, but without the ability to provide upcoming interactive experiences. Magellan Systems introduced Trailblazer, a handheld GPS system for outdoorsmen. At just 14 ounces and $500, it is a massive step up from the 30-ounce, $3,000 price tags of earlier GPS offerings.
Dominating the show floor, yet still being treated as the ugly red-headed stepchild that all the appliance and car alarm companies wish they did not have to put up with.
There's going to be a reason why there's going to be an E3, and suddenly CES doesn't look as impressive in size anymore.
Funny how that works. And continuing on our look at multimedia at CES, Compton announces patent grant.
Oh yeah, Compton New Media, a publisher of CD-ROM encyclopedias, announced at CES that they were granted a broad patent giving them rights to the idea of searching and retrieving data that is not just text from a database, aka multimedia. The patent announcement and Compton's demand that all companies in the space either license their database software or pay them a 1 to 3% royalty immediately provoked backlash and outrage. The patent office would dismiss the grant in March, with further confirmations later in 1994.
Yeah, that is some pretty obnoxious patent trolling right there. My goodness.
Oh, yeah. The idea that, you're pulling it out of a database and it's not just text. Well, I can get that idea patented. It is patently nonsensical for any number of reasons. But, this is a tempest in a teapot. But apparently it was a huge deal on the floor because everybody and their uncle wants in on the interactive multimedia thing. Like we said, there's a bunch of cable companies, the 3DO set-top boxes. All of this is depending on the concept of, you push a button and they send you a file. Well, that's their current definition of multimedia. And it's big business and everybody wants in on it.
Absolutely. And speaking of everybody wanting in on something, the race to get through all of Carl's notes about digital distribution is on.
Okay, yeah. And I'm very, very sorry, people. I've got to read all this. The ungodly number of articles that I had to read through about interactive television and streaming video and streaming multimedia this month would not end. Again, a lot of it is CES adjacent. And everything we've said so far about nobody in the industry really knows where this is going and why a company like NEC would bet the farm, not on 3D graphics, but on interactive video. Why everybody is going gaga over MPEG CDs and all this other crap. It's because nobody really knows what potential is in this whole idea of pulling off video files from a database. So, here we go. Every player in the movie and TV business seems to be trying to make digital distribution of digital media a reality. Blockbuster has teamed up with IBM to create a 20 trillion byte, that's 20 gigabytes, for us normal mortals, server system that will deliver films, music, TV, and video games digitally to Blockbuster and Blockbuster music stores. The first test unit has been completed and can burn a movie to 2 CDs, music CDs, or video games on demand. This tech will hopefully help lay the foundations for Blockbuster's parent company, Viacom's planned testing of a digital on-demand service for homes in the fall in Northern California, together with AT&T. Blockbuster and Viacom also have partnered with Bell South and Comcast, cable company, to work on digital projects. This comes as a wave of mergers are hitting the media and telecommunications industry, like Bell Atlantic Corporation, one of the baby bells, merging with the U.S.'s largest cable company, Telecommunications Inc., and the bidding war over Paramount that we talked about last month. This is all part of a reshuffling of the media landscape as the much-hyped information superhighway begins to take shape. James M. Meyer, a communications analyst who covers QVC for Janie Montgomery Scott, said, quote, both QVC and Viacom have to bid for Paramount in 1994, not 2000 when this technology is actually available, end quote. And I love that quote. That was one of my favorite quotes of this whole thing because it's the acknowledgement that none of this is ready for prime time. Everything we said earlier about MPEG movies not looking like crap is true. There is no current value to any of this.
Absolutely. Also funny to see Blockbuster being so aggressive in all of those alternative spaces when they would say no thank you to a little company called Netflix a few decades down the line.
Well, and I think it's partially because they're going to get burned so badly on so many of these investments.
Probably, yeah. Viacom is about to have a bit of a rough time of it, despite adding that Paramount jewel to their crown.
Well, they're going to overpay for Paramount so much. Again,
yes.
If you haven't listened to the Business Wars series about the battle for Paramount, I highly recommend it. There's so many twists and turns in that. And now here's another great quote from David S. Lundin. He's the president of the Blockbuster Technology Division. He said, quote, Viacom and Blockbuster are not exactly asleep at the wheel when it comes to future technology.
See, now that could have been the quote of the episode right there.
It could have been. Now, Blockbuster also began renting CD-ROM products for Macs, PCs, Sega CD, CDI, and 3DO systems at over 50 of its San Francisco area locations, with plans to expand their activities nationwide by November. The fact that I just listed 5 different formats is going to be a problem. I mean, It's not like VHS. It's not like they still carry Betamax at Blockbuster. The market, when you have to have the same product in that many formats, it's not going to work well for you. Now, I've found one indication that the Milpitas trial, and this was the big trial in Northern California that I mentioned earlier, where they were going to have a digital video. This was AT&T together with Blockbuster and Viacom. I found one source that says that it never actually gets off the ground. It was supposed to start very shortly, and this is true for most of these big projects. So there's a whole bunch of these listed where they're like, oh, we're going to do a test market here, test market there. All of them are relying on these very, very expensive set-top boxes to decode the MPEG files. And they're just too expensive. They cannot justify the test markets with these extremely expensive set-top boxes. So the Milpitas one, as far as I can tell, never happened. AT&T also announced plans to team up with GTE, another regional phone company, to bring digital services such as on-demand movies to customers, with a test market to start by late 1994. Again, no indication that this actually takes place.
Well, I mean, can you imagine bringing digital movies to someone over dial-up in 1994? I mean...
Well, this is the thing. Over dial-up would be a very bad way to do this. Cable, on the other hand...
Well, yeah, of course.
Might be. And this is where this merging of companies... There's more and more merging of the telephone companies with the cable lines. So some of these, you're not quite sure which lines they might be using for these.
That's fair.
But yeah. Now, this comes as most of the U.S. telephone service providers are announcing ambitious plans to upgrade their systems to fiber optic. Fiber optic is the big thing at this time. Have you ever seen the movie Other People's Money?
No, I don't think so.
It's a Danny DeVito movie. It's based on a play, and it's about one of these 80s corporate raiders who is trying to buy up an old copper wire company to basically rip it apart for pieces. Sort of like the what Richard Gere's character wants to do in Pretty Woman. Mm-hmm. And there's this great speech at the end of it where he's talking to the shareholder meeting, trying to get them to side with him with tearing the company down. He's like, have you heard of fiber optic? It's going to make these wires pointless. You know, do you want to be the buggy whip maker, the last one, the one that made the best buggy whips? when no horses are left around, you know. I highly recommend it. The movie has sort of a weird ending, which I think is not the way the play originally ended. They gave it sort of a happy Hollywood ending.
Ah, gotcha.
But up until then, the movie is amazing, and Danny DeVito is, I'm
sure he is.
He does the slime ball so well in that movie. It's phenomenal.
But I mean, this brings up the interesting point, though, too. You know, all of the sexiest headlines are about content. You know, content is king. But who are the companies that are quietly making out like bandits in this period? It's the infrastructure companies who already had the infrastructure and realized that they would need to keep a hold of their monopoly on the infrastructure and expand their infrastructure technology to remain relevant. And so while nobody cares about QVC anymore, AT&T is still a company you hear about from time to time.
And that's the thing. It's that control over the infrastructure. Here, there's another one. Digital Equipment Corporation. We've heard of them. Has signed a deal with USA Video and this is a company that did video on demand streaming software. So they were creating the infrastructure. And they sign up to do a video on demand service via Bell Atlantic. USA Video has developed their own streaming video software and has agreements with Paramount and Warner Brothers for content, and DEC will provide the servers. So we're seeing DEC is a company that's not had the best of time the last couple of years. Getting together with these guys who desperately need a hardware partner. And you got Paramount and Warner Brothers signing away these rights. I mean, Paramount, they're fighting over Paramount right now, but somehow for this regional thing, they're getting the rights to movies.
Right.
And, there's so many weird shenanigans going on with all of this. And there's these, and you said it, the infrastructure. US West announces plans to spend over $800 million to build voice and data service network. They know that there's money coming there. And Pacific Bell has ordered 4 powerful computers from HP to deliver movies on demand. HP has also got an order for video servers from Telecommunications Incorporated. I mean, I don't know how much of this infrastructure actually ever gets put into place. It's all way, way too early for it to be meaningful, but we see that it's coming. And everybody wants to be at the cutting edge. Plus, I'm sure all of these announcements, even if none of them ever goes anywhere, if not a single dime is sold, all of these stocks are getting a bump in the market. Mm-hmm. They're all going up. Just like, in the last 6 months, if you announced that your company was doing anything with AI, your stock shot up, even if nobody knew what the hell that meant.
Oh, yes. Sounds like a bit of a bubble to me, Carl, though I'm no economist.
Well, I'm just waiting for everybody to read. Now we're leaving 94 and going back to 2024 for just a moment. If you've been following the news, the new legislation coming out of the EU to regulate AIs, it's going to be a lot of fun because you're going to have to list what you used as source data. And that's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt for all of these guys.
I mean, just have your AI do it for you. Of course, that's a perfect segue because anytime there is a broad new frontier of this kind, it very quickly attracts government attention as well. And with all of this telecom stuff going on, the U.S. government pushes for open superhighway.
The Clinton administration will be putting forward a bill to promote an open architecture for the information superhighway to avoid a series of closed gardens and proprietary systems and open competition between baby bells, cable companies, and more. And yes, welcome to the world we live in today.
Mm-hmm.
So no more walled gardens. Everything is accessible to everybody. I'm sure that will never get watered down, and I'm sure it will have no negative consequences for democracy or anything else.
The internet has been nothing but wonderful for all the peoples of the planet. Yes. The internet tells me so.
Yeah.
Anywho, in addition to the telecoms and the information superhighway, cable TV enters internet age.
Performance Systems International Incorporated will announce plans to let users get onto the internet through cable systems operated by Continental Cablevision Incorporated at the ComNet 94 conference at the end of January. Speeds from 56K to 1.544 megabits per second can be expected.
Ooh-wee.
Oh yeah, that's some speed right there, baby.
But it was at the time, man. I mean, I was still struggling along on a 28.8 at this time.
Well, and this is the thing. I mean, we're going from a world. I mean, when we look at the 40-year jumps and all of those online systems that rely 100% on telephone wires, and suddenly now we're going to get a new player. We've got cable companies coming into this. And if they can get you access to that nice, brand spanking new open internet at breakneck speeds of up to 1.5 megabits per second, that's not too shabby.
Indeed. But we end this look at this heady new future with a note of caution from another high-flying segment of the industry where the multimedia boom doesn't lead to hiring boom.
While everyone from telecoms to book publishers is trying to get into the multimedia bandwagon, the number of people desperate to get jobs in the industry is dwarfing the number of jobs actually available. Hundreds of job applications are coming into publishers each week for sometimes just a dozen open positions. The big issue seems to be that everyone wants in on this new business, but few actual projects are getting started. And with the plethora of platforms from computers to consoles to interactive TV systems, no one knows where to place their bets. The New York Times profiles Leonard, and I'm probably going to kill it, Mlodinow?
It's probably Mlodinow.
Yeah. Mlodinow, yeah. A former TV writer on shows like Star Trek The Next Generation, who has a PhD in physics, who now works on educational titles for Knowledge Adventure, one of several Silicon Valley and LA-based companies actually putting out products in this field already. They are expanding their multimedia staffs, but they are the exception.
Don't worry, guys. This will work itself out. The investors will just decide it doesn't matter where they place their bets, so they might as well just start throwing money at everybody. Problem solved.
Very true.
No repercussions whatsoever.
No, none whatsoever. I mean, it's the gaming industry is a constant flood of new money with new open positions that will never end. Yeah. But, I mean, it is one of these weird moments where what do you do? What is going to be the need of developers, and what are the products that you can actually sell? And yeah, I mean, edutainment seems to be one of the few areas where they're actually hiring at this point. The interactive movie thing is going to take off. But, yeah. And the other thing that they talk about is the people with the actual skills to do this, because, this guy is a script writer, but writing an interactive, product is not the same as writing a television script. And a lot of people won't be able to make that transition.
Absolutely. Now, moving on to the way we always end with a few miscellaneous tidbits, I have to ask Carl a bit of a question. Were you there at the dawn of the third age of mankind?
No.
Were you there when Babylon 5 premiered?
No, I wasn't. On January 27th, 1994, Babylon 5 premiered, setting both new standards for serialized TV, but also for the use of computer graphics in a TV show for both external shots of ships as well as backgrounds. And the video toaster made a lot of it possible during the first season. So, on January 27th, I was still in Germany. And by the time I got to the States in the summer of 94, the show had not premiered in Germany yet. It wouldn't come until later. So by the time I get to the States, I had already seen Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine had started airing already in Germany at that point. Because that came out almost immediately over there.
Yep. But
Babylon 5 was a much harder sell. And so by the time I got to the States, I was already deep into DS9. I saw it advertised a couple of times. It came on a really weird time, like Saturday afternoon or something, because it was a syndicated show. And I watched maybe an episode or two, but I didn't realize just how serialized it was. And let's face it, it didn't feel real like the sets did in Deep Space Nine.
No, they really suffered for all of their use of very early CG there. It's a very uneven show. I had a friend who was super into it at the time. My uncle was super into it at the time. He was a sci-fi fan. I could never get that into it. The premise is amazing. The execution isn't always the greatest. Some of the actors are brilliant. Some of the actors are terrible. It's typical of sci-fi before the golden age of television helped make it respectable, basically.
Yeah. Now, I am a huge fan of the show today, but I watched it probably the best way you can. This was 2005, 2006. I had a couple of weeks of downtime where I had nothing else to do, and I bought the box sets one after the other, and I just watched the episodes. So I was watching 2 or 3 episodes a day, and if I had had to wait a week between episodes, I probably would have lost interest. So the slow parts you kind of got through fairly quickly, and the parts that were connected, you managed to follow all the threads very, very quickly. So I breezed through all 5 seasons in maybe 2 weeks. And yes. I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
There's elements of it that I like quite a bit. And certainly the ambition of it is pretty darn amazing. But, it was hamstrung by a few different things, not the least of which was its cancellation in the middle of the 4th season, which then caused Straczynski, and I know hindsight's 2020, but I rant about this all the time, so I'm going to do it again, which caused Straczynski to decide, rather than just letting that end where it was supposed to end and then maybe try to do comic books or tie-in novels or something else to finish the story, he decided to accelerate the story, get as much of it told in season 4 as he could, rush through the Shadow War and the liberation of Earth, and then whoops, he got a 5th season that basically had to tread water for half a season before he could actually start telling what little bits of story that he had not tried to cram into season 4, and that ends it on a bit of a sour note for me as well.
Yeah, season 5 really is a disappointment in that sense. I mean, and yeah, it's one of those realities of network television where you don't really get to control which order it's coming in. Now, a rebooted version of the show is coming.
Yes, or so J. Michael says. We'll.
I mean,
what I mean is, I'll believe it when I see it. I know he's working on it. I know it's real, but
yeah, I know.
I'll believe it when I see it.
This is true. I still haven't seen the new animated movie.
No, I haven't seen that either.
Yeah, so at some point I'll have to do that, but... and we never got the video game. The infamous Sierra game that disappeared.
Yes, absolutely. But while Babylon 5 stumbles a bit, even out of the gate, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers are all the rage.
The Christmas buying season got a surprise shakeup when the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers suddenly burst onto the scene, creating a minor panic as few retailers saw the line taking off. Other standouts were figures based on the Batman animated series, Nightmare Before Christmas, TMNT, and Barney.
I liked it better when they called it Voltron. Thank you very much. No, this is the point where now I can join you in being the old man yelling at the cloud and being like, this, I was too old for this. Because I mean, obviously I was very aware of Power Rangers, but yeah, I was too old for Power Rangers, other than making passing notice that, the Pink Ranger was indeed hot. But but I never watched Power Rangers because I was too old for it. But I did love Voltron about 5 or 6 years prior. I realize Voltron's even older than that, but that's when I saw it. Was about 5 years prior.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware of it either. You could make an argument that it's the last big action figure phenomenon. It really is sort of the last hurrah of that 80s mold of action figures, and
very true. The
PlayStation's really going to just put the kibosh on the future of that type of toy.
That and Magic the Gathering, and a little thing called the Pokemon.
Yeah. Pokemon.
We get really a merging. I mean, obviously, big toy lines like Masters of the Universe or G.I. Joe or Transformers had a collection element to them, but it's after this that we get the merging of, people realize, hey, adults like collecting things, and adults like gambling and games of chance. I bet kids would like that stuff too. And we really move kids towards these kind of, these kind of things more than action figure lines as the big hot ticket items. I mean, obviously video games in general and whatnot too, but I really think, the introduction of things like Pokemon and Magic the Gathering and whatnot are really changed the pattern of childhood consumption quite significantly.
Yeah. Well, and I also think we can't underestimate the power of the Game Boy here.
Yes.
Because it's...
When I say Pokemon, I'm also meaning,
Yeah. But it's made gaming an even younger activity, and it's also brought the price of the cartridges down enough that it's more competitive, because the thing that Playthings magazine really talks about in conjunction with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is the stuff that's hard to find are not the individual action figures, it's the big Zoids. And those are expensive items. We're talking $30-$40 a pop. And now you're definitely in the price range of a Game Boy cartridge, or more than a Game Boy cartridge. And so I think that, the same, let's say 7 to 8 year olds or 6 to 10 year olds that would want to buy those are going to be more and more distracted away from it. I mean, nowadays you basically, action figures, 6 years old, 7 years old at the outer edge is the last time you're going to have them, and then you've lost them to other products. Whereas when we were kids, I mean, 10, 11 years old, you might still be buying action figures. That was still a regular age. That's gone way, way down. A 7-year-old is basically already out of action figures at that point. Toys, physical toys aren't interesting beyond that age. It's weird.
Exactly.
And of course, Saban already has the next show, Cybertron, in the pipeline. It's coming, and there'll be a million more.
Indeed, but recutting together Japanese live action shows isn't the only thing starting to make a splash in the West, as anime is also on the rise.
Yes, the New York Times has a fun little write-up on the growing popularity of anime in the USA and how many of its more violent and sexual themes can be disconcerting to US audiences accustomed to animation being relegated to children's entertainment. They also spoke to Robert Woodhead, co-founder of Surtech and now CEO of Amigo, an anime importer, who explained that, quote, if it's popular with college kids in America, it was probably intended for junior high school kids in Japan. They have fewer hang-ups about sex. End quote.
That is so true. See his example A, all the shoujo that was being watched by everyone around me when I was in college.
There you go.
And Bishonen.
Yeah. And of course, I caught this purely by accident because I was doing a search through the New York Times articles for video games and computers, and Woodhead, well, I mean, he's, wizardry. It's kind of
but no,
thing.
he is a true pioneer of the anime industry in the U.S. He was a big part of the early spread of it. I've never really gotten into anime, and I realize that it's just another way of saying animation. That's like saying I never got into food, or I never got into, board games. I realize it's broader than that, but I was of the right age where I was supposed to be hit by that, and certainly some of my friends were. I mean, I was aware it existed, but I never really got the anime bug, and I still, there's still not any, anime series that I've really ever enjoyed that much, and I haven't tried nearly all of them in existence, but I mean, I've tried from a wide variety of genres, from the Evangelions all the way down to the Inuyashas and everything in between. I mean, I haven't just tried one type. Now, I mean, there are a lot of Japanese animated movies I adore, just about anything by Miyazaki, and also Tokyo Godfather and stuff like that. But I don't know. It passed me over, even though I was theoretically in the right place at the right time at the right age for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I was college kid shortly after this, but I guess I had my fill of anime as a kid because I watched, every morning, before school, we got Battleship Yamato, so I pretty much saw Star Blazers all the way through twice.
Sure.
And loved it. But it was my only access at that time to that serialized storytelling. How many more days do they have before Earth is destroyed? And then when I got to Argentina, we had a bunch of stuff like Mazinga and Gigantor and all this stuff, because it was basically, as far as the South Americans were concerned, it was no different than an American or European produced cartoon. It just, cost us the same to turn it into Spanish. So I saw a ton of anime as a kid. The aesthetic was just another aesthetic. But and I'm probably in the same boat as you. A lot of the cultural conventions of interpersonal relationships, it never rang true to me. It never felt believable in their behaviors. Right now, for the first time in many, many years, I'm trying to watch anime, and I'm watching this Delicious in Dungeon show on Netflix.
I've heard that one is very funny. I've never watched it, but I'm aware of it.
There's some very, very funny stuff with it. It's just, there's also so many weird behaviors. The characters are so broken and one-dimensional that at a certain point you're like, okay, I've seen the same gag now. I'm on episode 4. I'm kind of over the gag. And I don't know. I'm missing something. You know, the core premise is still funny, but it's like, I don't know.
No, I mean, there's a cultural, there's a cultural barrier there. I mean, it's not an insurmountable one. Obviously, many Westerners like anime, but I've seen enough more through games, which have a lot of the same tropes than through anime. I mean, I've come to be able to recognize, a lot of Japanese tropes. I mean, I couldn't tell you the history behind them or how they're meaningful in Japanese culture, but I mean, I've come to recognize when they're there. And I think that, just the kind of narrative structure that I enjoy clashes with some of the cultural sensibilities of Japanese storytelling, which is fine. That doesn't make it wrong.
No.
Not like prejudiced against it. It's just it doesn't quite work for me. That said, for some reason, I wonder if some of it is too that I was into JRPGs and narrative Japanese games well before most of the West was. I mean, I was playing from Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy, not Final Fantasy VII, and I do love me some what I like to call anime bullshit in my video game narratives. And so I wonder if part of it is not so much not being able to connect with some of these Japanese tropes, but that having connected with some of them through an interactive medium first makes it feel more shallow to me when connecting to it in a non-interactive medium, given some of the other resistances I have to some of those tropes based on how I like narrative structure. I don't know that that's true, but I do know that there are a lot of really convoluted anime plot-heavy style video games that I like, and when I see a similar plot in an actual anime, it just completely turns me off. But when it's in a video game, I'm enthralled by it. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's probably also, and I might get into trouble for saying this. As much as we like to praise game stories or stories in games, for the most part, they never, the best stories in games never even come close to the best stories in literature or in film.
That is true most of the time. I will hold up Planescape Torment against anything. I mean, not the very, very best of literature, but I will hold Planescape Torment up against the lowest tier of high quality literature anytime. But you're right. I do think that what you're saying is true, that part of that is that since I don't expect a video game story to necessarily reach the same heights, I'm more accepting of something than I would be in another medium where I'm expecting more out of it. I think that's probably a fair analysis as well.
Yeah, it's just a question of, what is my alternative? What am I comparing it to? What's the measurement, It's like realistic set design when I walk into a theater, a play. It's not going to be the same expectations when I walk into a movie and I'm expecting, it to look real. When I'm watching Babylon 5, knowing that and this was probably where my Babylon 5 experience, having gone into it, knowing the production history of the show, knowing that it used digital sets and stuff, I was ready for it. It wasn't sitting down going, okay, I could watch Deep Space Nine right now, or I could watch this. Why am I looking at the one that looks like crap? Those expectations, I think, are the difference. And
Exactly.
That's it. Okay, sorry.
I think that's true. I don't know if you'll get in trouble for that or not, but if anyone decides to ban you over your controversial views, at least you won't be alone, as the EC bans imperial measurements.
As of January 1st, the advertising and selling of goods not measured in metric units has been banned by the European community. This protectionist measure to make the importation of US and Japanese goods more difficult has now led to the absurd result that those advertising and displaying monitors and TVs using inches to describe their size can be fined, and things like computer disk sizes are no longer standardized. Yeah, this obviously doesn't really take hold and doesn't last very long, but it's, and for everybody who doesn't know, European Community was the organization that preceded the European Union. Same organization, just different name at this point. And so they passed this idiot law. And so it's no longer a 5 1/4 inch disc. It's whatever number of centimeters that would be. And it's just nonsense. But
indeed. And speaking of nonsense, X-Men movie casting rumor is awesome.
Yeah, I just had to throw this one in. A rumored casting for the X-Men movie that, like so many comic book movies, is being rumored about is Harvey Keitel as Wolverine.
I could see it.
Oh, yeah.
I could see it. Because, of course, as amazing as Hugh Jackman is, and we all agree, and we're glad he continues to play the character, he is all wrong for the part of Wolverine, who is this little short, stubby guy.
And I pulled up a picture for myself of Harvey Keitel in 1993. Oh, yeah, he would have been so perfect for the role. So perfect.
I totally agree. I think that would work.
So, okay, that finally brings to an end this mammoth episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. So, Alex, you have one final official task, and that is to choose a word. Oh, wait. Sorry. Before we do the word of the episode, we have the worst ad of the month. And this is in GamePro magazine. It is an ad for the Super NES version of Wolfenstein. And I don't know what's wrong here. I have no idea what hellish, horrible, wrong happened, or which last-minute deadline somebody in marketing discovered that they had to fulfill, and they hired some nephew who was in middle school to draw something. But this ad is absolutely atrocious. I'll put a link to where you can download the file in the show notes. Have you seen this ad?
Mein Leben indeed.
Yeah. I don't understand this image that I'm looking at. It's just terrible.
It's the 90s, Carl. You are looking at the 90s.
No. Okay, look at the wall on the right. Why is it transparent? Why can I see through the steel door on the right and see the wall behind it? Look at this. Look at this line here. Why can I see this line? This makes no sense.
Is that gentleman in the back playing a trumpet? I know it's the standard MP, like with his pistol, but and with like a ring of smoke, but it makes it look like he's playing a trumpet.
Yes, it's like, and why are his legs shorter than his torso? I mean, all of them.
Maybe he's Wolverine in disguise, Carl.
and it's just this weird baggy mass of
and I just love how the tagline is a virtual nightmare, because that is indeed what I am looking at.
Yeah.
is a virtual nightmare.
This is just, it's so terrible.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah. This is the artwork I expect from one of those guys doing, spray painted art on the side of on a street corner, at like 2:00 in the morning. It's just bad. So bad. So, okay. I just needed to share that. And the final bit, the quote of the month, and I love it. It's from Arthur C. Clarke. And this appeared in an article in Amiga Computing magazine about VR. And it said, quote, "Virtual reality won't merely replace TV, it will eat it alive." End quote.
I'm sure it will about 5 years from now.
Yeah, exactly.
Virtual reality is always 5 years away from making it big.
Yep. Okay, so, Alex, looking back at everything that we've talked about, what is the word of the episode?
Well, obviously I start thinking about these things as we're moving through the headlines. And I was having real problems with this one because it feels also disconnected from each other. But then I realized that is entirely the point, that it is also disconnected from each other. So in honor of the premiere of Babylon 5, my word of the day, or phrase as it often is "What do you want?"
Ooh, very nice.
Do you want big arcades full of amusement park rides? Do you want family entertainment centers like the Magic Kingdom? Do you want consoles that move tons of polygons, consoles that move no polygons? Y'all need to figure out what you want so we can give it to you, because everything is chaos in this month, it feels like.
That is so very, very true. And if you're one of these tiny little companies trying to launch a console, the question really should be, who are you?
Yes. Pearls of Wisdom from J. Michael Straczynski.
Okay, so everybody, remember, if you want to contact us, all the information is in the show notes. If you're listening to us, give us a big thumbs up. It always helps. Remember also, end of the month, we will be doing the Patreon Hangout. So if you are either a patron of this wonderful show or of another wonderful show called They Create Worlds, then you will get an invite to that. And we will be posting the patron hangout game choices for you to vote on the patron pages. And tell us where everybody can find your lovely work, sir.
Well, apparently in this live stream that's coming at the end of the month for our patrons. But as always, theycreateworlds.com, the podcast at podcast.theycreateworlds.com, twice a month, every month. As I said at the top of the hour, which I definitely use that term very loosely and metaphorically, is very proud of the work that we've done on the Sega Saturn in the last couple of episodes, the one that's just dropped at time of recording and the one that is to come in another couple of weeks. So if Sega interests you, if the insanity of the 90s that we just talked about in this episode interests you, check that out. I think it's kind of a great companion, actually, to this specific episode, not just because it's the same time period, but because all of this confusion that's embodied in this month's headlines, I kind of discuss in relation to the Saturn in that episode. So
excellent. Okay, everybody, have fun.